Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was in Avatar. The world could not maintain the peace that Naruto fought for in Jiraiya's memory. With a heavy heart, he forsakes his time and seals himself away in hopes of a peaceful future. What happens when a girl who wishes to express herself finds the sealed body of the hero of the flame, unleashes him, and learns from him? What will the future hold for the world? Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 16, Preparations. And that's all that has been going on without your knowledge, Your Majesty, Naruto said as he, the members of the Fire Nation, and Earth King K sat inside of his personal office. The others had opted to help make sure Long Foam was securely imprisoned. Better to be safe than sorry. I can't believe that I never knew. Kay whispered out sadly. All this time, a war was going on, one that could grow to a global scale. He then turned to the Fire Nation members and asked, if it is truly your country that is waging war, then why are you not trying to finish me off? Iroh stepped forward and explained, while it is true that I once dreamed of taking over your city, it is no longer the case. My eyes were opened years ago, and now I only seek peace between the nations. My uncle has been helping me figure out what he has, Zuko stated as he looked to be in contemplation. While I still have this voice in my head screaming at me to regain my honor by removing you, I know that helping you is the right choice. I'm here because I wish to see someone who I thought was dead, Azula said as she leaned against a wall with her arms crossed. Naruto promised me and my brother the chance to see her again, if we help take down our father. He also helped me see that if this war continues, then something worse will be brought to the nations. Kay nodded at the reasonings of the royal family and then turned to Ty Lee. She smiled and said, I'm here because I don't want to see this war go on anymore. I've seen plenty of it, and I know that it is definitely wrong. Plus, my friends are here and they want to end it as well. I'll do anything I can to help them. I see, Kay murmured to himself before he turned to the two shinobi. And what of you two? Why did you go through all of the trouble just to help me open my eyes to the truth? Naruto was leaning on a wall much like Azula and didn't answer right away, making Mai and the others turn to him expectantly. He cracked open his natural eye at Kay and answered, the only reason I'm here is to stop this world from being plunged into darkness. This war will bring about a being so fearsome and powerful that I'm not even sure I have the strength to even hold it off for long. This being will not hesitate to rip the earth apart and bring chaos to the nations, the Jubi no Saika, ten-tailed calamity. Is there a chance that we can prevent it from being brought forth? Naruto shook his head slowly and solemnly. No. It has enough power to break through to the mortal plane from the spiritual and seek a human host. However, seeing as it hasn't done so yet, I can only guess that it is biding its time for a chance to gain more power. When do you think that will be, Naruto? Asked Mai in worry as the others now had their full attention on the blonde's words. During the eclipse, the day of Black Sunday. The sun will be directly behind the moon, hitting it fully with its energy. The Jubi of my era was said to be trapped within the lunar sphere, so if it is hit by a direct line from the sun, then that means that the Jubi in the spiritual plane will be able to gain an incredible amount of power, easily enough to leave and search for a host, Iroh finished with wide eyes. Exactly. Even if we end this war, we will still be unable to stop the Jubi from arriving on that day. However, we still need to put an end to it so that the Jubi has a much lower amount of negative energy to call upon when it arrives. We also need to be sure that we have enough military strength to have a fighting chance against the beast. However, there is no doubt in my mind that many people will die in holding off the Jubi. And I doubt I will survive either, stated the Uzumaki much to the surprise of the others, save for Mai who looked away sadly. Kay then stood up from his seat and began to head back to his throne room. Then we must act quickly if we are to prepare for the coming trials. Captain. Yes, Your Majesty. Said an earthbender captain with a salute. Summon my 4 generals at once. And get me a messenger bird. There is much we need to do, and we are running out of time the more we wait. At once, my lord. He saluted before rushing off to complete his tasks. Naruto nodded at this and made to leave the room before Kei called out, "What will you do while I begin preparations?" Naruto turned back to him and replied, "I'm going to fulfill my promise to Azula and Zuko before I take my student for the final stages of her training. Tell the Avatar when he and his friends return to meet me at the Eastern Air Temple in 1 week's time." Kei nodded while Naruto and the Fire Nation members left the royal palace. Summoning 2 large owls, the group of 6 took off towards the Earth Kingdom settlement of Hera, the town where Ursa was staying in. Hera, 3 days later. Ursa was preparing tea for her friend Eva, who was currently visiting. The two had spent more time together ever since the rescue of the innocent woman by Naruto, and months ago. Eva still couldn't get over how safe she felt, and how handsome her rescuer was, while Ursa kept thinking about how much stronger Mai must be due to being his student. They were interrupted by a knock on the door and Ursa went to answer it. When she opened it, her eyes widened in shock and tears threatened to spill at the sight of her 2 children with her brother-in-law, Ty Lee, and the 2 shinobi right behind them. "Zuko? Azula?" she asked hesitantly, as if they would disappear and her eyes would open from another dream. Instead of a verbal answer, Zuko embraced her while Azula offered a very rare true smile. When Ursa turned her gaze to Naruto, he smiled and nodded as if to confirm to her that the 2 in front of her were real. Overjoyed, Ursa pulled Azula into the embrace as she cried into her children's shoulders. After some time, she was able to recompose herself and usher them all inside. However, Naruto politely declined the offer and told her that he and Mai needed to head out in order to meet Aang on time at the Air Temple. Understanding that what they had to do was important, Ursa thanked them profusely for reuniting her with her family and bid them farewell. Once the 2 shinobi left, Ursa turned to the others with a kind and gentle smile. "So, tell me everything about your lives so far." Easter Air Temple, 3.5 days later. Upon arriving at the Easter Air Temple, Aang was greeted by a guru named Puthik, who introduced himself as a spiritual brother of the air nomads and a personal friend of Gyatso. This surprised the airbender, but he was eager to learn from the man. "Before you begin your journey to bring balance to the world, you must first bring balance to yourself. And the first step is with this," informed the guru before he gave the Avatar a yellow-green liquid. Aang took a drink before immediately spitting it out in disgust. "Ugh. It tastes like onion and banana juice." "That's because it is," happily declared Puthik before he drank his own dish. "Yum yum." Aang couldn't help but blink at how eccentric the man before him was. Before he could say anything, a screech filled the air, and the 2 turned to see the shinobi duo riding up to the temple on Koyuki. When they landed, Naruto dismissed the snowy owl and bowed to the guru in respect. "It's nice to meet someone so spiritually aware and at peace with himself. I am Naruto Uzumaki and this is my apprentice, Nara." Puthik smiled at them in greeting and nodded. "The pleasure and honor is all mine, Master Sage. I take it that you're here to train your student in the ways of the sage as well as keep track of young Aang's progress?" "That is correct." "Then I welcome you both to the Eastern Air Temple." "Come then, we have much to do and our time window is steadily closing," stated the guru before heading through the temple and leading them to a cavernous area with many pools of water. "I had a vision many years ago about being a guide and teacher for the Avatar on his journey to spiritual enlightenment. To do this, I plan to teach him how to open up and control his chakras, or spiritual limiters." Naruto nodded in understanding while Aang looked slightly confused, and Mai just paid attention. "It almost seems like what you're doing is helping him with his inner gates that deal with chakra that shinobi use." "In a way, it is like that. However, while the chakra of your era was a balance of spiritual and physical energies, the chakras I speak of refer only to spiritual. The inner gates of your era also focused on the physical aspects of the one opening them, which made them so dangerous to open." "You seem to know quite a bit about my era," commented the Uzumaki with a raised brow. "I have been around for quite some time, Master Sage." During my travels, I came across old tomes and scrolls concerning your people and learned all that I can from them. I know much more than most, but if I had to guess, then I'd say that I only know about a quarter the amount of information concerning your era. Naruto nodded and listened to Puffik as he explained to Aang about how chakras needed to be opened, and how it was an intense experience. He even warned that once the avatar began, he could not stop until all 7 were opened, or else he would be completely blocked off from his spiritual side. Once Aang agreed to begin, Puffik turned to the other 2 and said, "You are both welcome to join us as well. Anyone can go on this journey as it helps lead to inner peace of mind and soul." Naruto shook his head and replied, "As tempting as it is, I need to get started on teaching Mai about senjutsu. But I will definitely ask you to help me when I feel she is ready." "I understand, and I wish young Mai good luck on her training." "Thank you, Guru Puffik," said the Nara with a bow before Naruto led her back outside. She was surprised when he suddenly left in a plume of smoke, and her surprise grew when she did as well. When her amber eyes opened again, she was taken aback at the sight of a dense swamp-like forest with toads of all sizes going about their business. "Welcome, Mai, to MT Maya Boku," stated Naruto, as many of the toads looked to the 2 shinobi in surprise. This place is amazing," Mai whispered in awe. "This is the home of the toads?" Naruto nodded before he stood stock still with his eyes closed. "It is also the safest place for you to learn senjutsu. I will warn you now, learning this art is a long and trying journey. However," he said as he opened his sage eyes at her, "the end result is definitely worth it." Mai looked to the toad-like eyes in wonder before a smirk came to her face. "Let's get to it then." Back with Aang and Puffik, the airbender was currently on his 3rd chakra, the fire chakra. It dealt with willpower but was blocked by shame. The first 2 chakras were earth and water. Earth was found at the base of the spine, dealt with survival, and was blocked by fear. To overcome this, Aang had to envision what he feared the most, which was Ozai surrounded by darkness and fire. At first, he was afraid that the vision was real, but Puffik informed him that it was not, and that he had to clear his mind of his fear. The airbender was able to do so after some time, opening his 1st chakra. The 2nd chakra, water, was located at the sacrum. It dealt with pleasure and was blocked by guilt. When asked what he blamed himself for, Aang reminisced of the day he fled the Southern Air Temple upon finding out that he was the Avatar. On top of this, he remembered the time that he hurt Earth Kingdom soldiers at General Fong's fortress while in the Avatar state. Puffik told Aang to accept that these things happened, and urged him to prevent them from clouding his judgment and poison his energy. He stated that Aang must forgive himself if he wanted to be a positive influence on the world. Aang did so, and successfully opened the 2nd chakra. Now that he was on the 3rd, he had to lay out all of his shame before him. The biggest shame that Aang felt was when he used firebending too early and ended up burning Katara. "I'm never going to use firebending again, I can't," Aang said sadly. "You cannot achieve balance if you deny that part of your life. You are the Avatar, therefore, you are a firebender," Puffik stated as Aang finally accepted the fact and opened his chakra. However, something seemed off to the guru. That chakra opened much less like a flowing creek, and more like a burping bison. Aang's response was a very loud burp before he smacked his lips. "Tastes like onions and bananas, but strangely something else. Pickles?" he asked as he turned to Puffik, who just shrugged unsurely. "We'll continue this tomorrow, Aang. You need to rest. We'll deal with the next 3 in the morning, and then the last the day after." Aang nodded at his current teacher and left to go spend time with Appa. Back with the shinobi, Mai was in the middle of getting a feel for gathering nature chakra with the help of the toad's special oil. So far, her progress was minimal. She couldn't stay still long enough to gather the energy, and it resulted in Naruto hitting it out of her with his senjutsu staff. "You need to focus, Mai. This is the final stage of your training before I give you your ultimate task. Remember, you don't control the power, you accept it and allow it to fill you up. In order to do this, you need to relax and let go." Mai nodded and settled into her meditative position. She opened her senses to the natural energy surrounding her and controlled her chakra to allow the energy to enter her body. The sensation of having nature chakra enter her was bizarre and unfamiliar, but she ignored it in favor of letting her body relax and have the energy fill her. Naruto looked to her with an analytic gaze, watching for any signs of her becoming a stone-toed statue. Senjutsu was incredibly difficult for one to learn, but he had faith in Mai and would guide her through the trials. He then noticed her eyes slowly gaining the orange pigmentation around the lids. Amazing! To think she could relax her body and mind so well. Still, it's probably because she had someone to guide her all throughout her time as a shinobi. I didn't have many people help me, so I wasn't as skilled as she is now. Maybe if I did have someone to teach me like I did her, I would have had fewer issues with my training. After nearly 15 minutes of allowing the energy to slowly fill her, Mai opened her eyes and Naruto smirked at the sight of the yellow irises and rounded horizontal pupils. How do you feel, Mai? Mai slowly looked to her right hand and clenched it, getting a feel for the power flowing through her. She smiled and looked to her sensei/precious person. I feel great. Better than I ever felt before. Naruto chuckled at her enthusiasm and pointed to a large stone frog. Show me, then. Mai smirked and stepped up to the statue before she used her newly enhanced strength to heft it over her head and hold it with both hands. How's that? Naruto's smirk grew into a grin, and he nodded to her. Great work. Now, we move on to you learning to do it without the oil. Grab some of those stone tablets behind you and follow me, he stated before he made his way to the mountainous area of Mayaboko with Mai in tow. He then looked up to the sun and thought, it's a good thing that time moves differently in the summoning realms. It feels like a week has passed, but I bet it's only been a day. Back with the avatar, he had just completed the 5th chakra, the sound chakra. Before, he had to handle the air chakra, located in the heart. It dealt with love, but was blocked by grief. The grief he had was for his people, the air nomads. But Puthik informed him that love was a form of energy and swirled all around every person. The love his people had that he lost was reformed into new love, his love for Katara. This chakra was the most enlightening for the young airbender, as he opened it with tears of joy coming from his eyes. The sound chakra was located in the throat. It dealt with truth and was blocked by lies. When Puthik explained that the 5th chakra was blocked mainly by the lies we tell ourselves, Aang remembered the instance when he concealed his true identity from Sokka and Katara, stating that he did not tell them that he was the Avatar at first, because he never wanted to be. Puthik said that Aang could not lie about his own nature, and that he needed to accept his destiny as the Avatar. With a sigh and a vision of him watching the world from above, Aang accepted this idea, and he successfully opened the sound chakra. The 6th pool of chakra is the Light Chakra, located in the center of the forehead. It deals with insight, and is blocked by illusion. The greatest illusion of this world is the illusion of separation. You mean like the 4 nations? Yes. We are all one whole world, yet we live as if divided. We're all connected. Everything is connected, Aang said in realization. That's correct. Even the illusion of the 4 elements is a block. The world relies on them all, yet we praise each one in a separate manner and cloud our minds from seeing the truth. I get it. It's like learning from only source when there are many others that all lead to the same goal, like how I'm learning about the other nations when I was born in Airbender. Exactly. Congratulations, Aang. You have opened the chakra of insight. Now, we will deal with the final one tomorrow. Be ready, for it will no doubt be the most difficult for you, he warned before he left the airbender to his thoughts. Aang kept his gaze on the setting sun and sighed at how things were going so far. Just one more to go. I wonder how hard it will be to open it. Back with the shinobi, it had been another week for them in comparison to Aang's single day. Naruto was currently sitting perfectly still on his stone tablet that was balanced on a stone spike high above ground. Mai was wobbling slightly as she tried to get herself balanced, which made Naruto smile warmly. Seeing her like this reminded him of when he was in her position. He inwardly chuckled at all of the bumps he had received courtesy of Fukusaka-sensei. Still, his teachings paid off in the end, and I'm glad to have known him. He was brought out of his thoughts when he heard his student sigh in relief and close her eyes in meditation. He took note of how still her tablet was and his smile grew. She was so close to reaching her goal. It wouldn't be long now. Back with Aang and Puthik, they were situated on the highest rooftop under the starry sky. This is it, Aang. The final chakra, and undoubtedly the most difficult. Are you ready? Aang nodded. I'll do whatever it takes. Very well then. The seventh chakra is the thought chakra, located at the crown of the head. It deals with pure cosmic energy, and is blocked by earthly attachments. I want you to think of everything that attaches you to this world, Aang. The Avatar nodded as thoughts of Katara and his friends came to his mind. Now, I want you to let them flow down the creek, forgotten. What? Aang exclaimed in shock. Why would I let go of Katara? I love her. Puthik looked to him sadly and said, learn to let her go, or you will never let the pure cosmic energy flow. Why would I choose cosmic energy over Katara? Asked Aang in slight annoyance. 3 chakras ago, that was a good thing. The guru looked to him sternly at that. You must learn to let her go. Otherwise, you will never be able to master the spiritual aspect of yourself. I'm sorry, but I can't let her go. Aang, in order to master the avatar state, you must open all the chakras. Surrender yourself to this task. Aang looked away sadly before he stood up and began walking away. He turned back to see Puthik looking to him in concern and said, I need to think this over. It's a hard decision. As the airbender left, Puthik sighed in slight disappointment. He needs to put the world before himself. It is his duty as the Avatar, after all. True, but he is still a child, remember? A voice called out, making Puthik turn to see Naruto and my seated Indian style. He smiled to them and asked, I take it that she was successful? Naruto's response was a grin while Mai opened her sage eyes to the guru. Of course, she was. She's my student after all, the Uzumaki said with pride, making Mai smile. That is wonderful news. Puthik said happily. What will you have her do now? Naruto held up his right hand and had a Rasengan form in it before it started to suck in wind and take on a shuriken shape. Her final test is to take the Rasengan and make it her own. When she does that, then I will have nothing more to truly teach her. She'll be a fully recognized kunoichi in my eyes. Puthik nodded and asked, do you still wish to open your spiritual chakras? At the Uzumaki's nod, the guru smiled and stated, then let us begin. Open your mind and look for your earth chakra, located at the base of the spine. It deals with willpower and is blocked by fear. Naruto sat in his meditative position and allowed his mind to open up and search for his fear. When the vision of Jubi came to mind, he mentally sighed and thought, this may take a while. Chapter 17, Spiritual Enlightenment. Let us begin your spiritual journey, Naruto, Puthik stated as he sat cross-legged across the blonde and his student who were seated similarly. We begin with the earth chakra, located at the base of the spine. It deals with survival, but is blocked by fear. Naruto nodded as he closed his eyes and evened out his breathing. Lay out all of your fear, Naruto. Let your greatest come into the light for you to see. In Naruto's mind, he saw many things that his heart feared, including being killed by Obito, having his hatred take over him, and his parents rejecting him. However, the biggest fear came into view, Mai and his daughter dead in pools of their own blood, with the Jubi standing right behind them in all its glory. Outside of his mind, Mai and Puthik saw him tense and tighten his closed eyes while his clenched fists drew blood. Naruto, what you are seeing is not real. It is merely your fear trying to keep you rooted. Let your courage survive and drive away your fear. Back in Naruto's mind, he stared at the Jubi who roared in primal fury. Still glaring at the beast, Naruto stepped up to his dead family and placed his hands on their heads. "I won't let this be your future," he murmured as the vision faded, and he opened his eyes to Puthick and Mai. "Well done, Naruto. You've opened your Earth Chakra," Puthick congratulated before he stood up. "Now, follow me to the underground waterfall. That is where we will begin your next chakra." The blonde and his student followed while Puthick kept talking. "You should know, Master Sage, that since you have begun this journey, your inner chakra is currently lost to you." The Uzumaki stopped walking in pure shock. "What?" Puthick nodded slowly. "Your chakra is a blend of physical and spiritual energies. Since you are trying to open your spiritual blocks, the spiritual side of your chakra has stopped flowing. You will get it back when you finish, but until then, you have none to call upon." Still shocked, Naruto slowly resumed following Puthick while Mai was growing more worried for her loved one. It didn't take long to reach the waterfall, and Puthick took his seat on the island in front of it with Naruto seated next to him. "The second chakra is your water chakra, located in the sacrum. It deals with pleasure, but is blocked by guilt. Lay all of your guilt before you." Naruto once again entered a meditative trance, and visions of him leaving both Konoha and the restored Yuzu entered his mind. His closed eyes formed a frown on the outside. "I left them. Both of my homes. I deserted them when they needed me most." A vision of Gaara and many other Sunagakure citizens were then seen. "I wasn't there for Gaara and his people. I let them down." Mai was surprised at how this spiritual journey was taking its toll on Naruto. She had never seen him so openly expressive before, and she wasn't sure whether or not to be happy or depressed, happy that he was opening up, or sad that he was letting out all of the negative aspects of his life. Puthick closed his eyes sadly and placed a comforting hand on the blonde's shoulder. "I know how guilt can weigh a person down, but it can be less burdening if you forgive yourself. These things happened, it's unfortunate, but we cannot change it. You must learn to forgive and let go of your guilt. Learn from it so that you may prevent another incident like that from happening." Naruto took in a deep breath and exhaled as his guilt seemed to wash away, and the disappointed faces of the people he failed turned into looks of forgiveness and content. "Very good, Naruto. Your water chakra is now open. Now we move back up to the outside. The next chakra will take place as the sun rises." Naruto nodded, and the two shinobi followed after the guru. Aang, who was in the area thinking over his final chakra, decided to follow. He may not have appreciated Naruto belittling him and the other avatars before him, but he had a feeling that watching Naruto go through the 7 chakras would help him in his decision. Fire Nation War Council. Ozai sat in his throne overlooking his many generals and other ranking officials. A table-sized map of the world was centered between all of them as they discussed ways to end the war. Many men suggested trying to break through Ba Sing Se once again, but they were shot down by other officials stating it was a lost cause after the drill's failure. Ozai perked up as one general made a suggestion. "Perhaps if we used out special project, Ba Sing Se could still be obtainable." This got murmurs throughout the room, some of agreement and others of confusion due to being out of the loop in regards to the special project. Ozai cleared his throat, gaining immediate attention, and stood up. He stepped onto the map and spoke. "The project is still in its testing phase. However, our engineers believe that they have made a breakthrough in regards to completing it. However, there is another pressing matter to think about: Uzumaki and his student." Quiet murmurs filled the room as Ozai continued. "We have to figure out a way to prevent him from hindering our actions. He is practically a god among men, but he must have a weakness." "And what do you propose this weakness is, sire?" Ozai grinned darkly and said 2 words. "His student." Eastern Air Temple. Mai tensed slightly and looked to the horizon with her eyes narrowed. Naruto stepped up to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You all right?" She shook her head unsurely. "I don't know. I can't help but get this feeling that something is going to happen, and soon." Naruto looked to the horizon she was gazing towards and narrowed his own eyes. Whatever happens, we'll get through it, Mai. She nodded and the two approached Pathik, who was waiting patiently for them. Once Naruto was ready, the guru said, the third chakra is the fire chakra, located in the stomach. It deals with willpower, and is blocked by shame. Tell me, what are you most ashamed of, Naruto? Naruto looked through his memories for his most shameful moments, but only one truly came to mind. I failed to stop my lost friend from falling into darkness. Sasuke wouldn't listen to me, and I failed to bring him home. It was the first promise I ever failed to fulfill. Mai listened to him with a look of sadness as he mentioned the man who tried many times to kill him. The bond they had must have been strong for Naruto to still be feeling ashamed over it. Aang also listened with a sad face. He knew Naruto was cynical and very blunt with how the world acts. However, he had no idea what the Uzumaki had been through, or how his past easily justified his feelings toward the world. Pathik smiled sadly at his newest spirit traveler. Broken promises are always hard to get through, especially if it was you who broke them. However, think over your life, Naruto. Your will to save him never faltered until the truth was thrust upon you. Your willpower is already very strong. Not to mention keeping the will to live after being forced to live alone in a world filled with chaos while you were its only peacekeeper. You opened this chakra a long time ago, but never got the chance to experience it until now. Naruto smiled gratefully to the guru and nodded. Yeah. I never gave up on him until I finally realized that he was too far gone. I also resolved myself to be the one to bring an end to his darkness while protecting my own people. Thank you, Pathik. The guru waved a dismissive hand with a smile as he led the group to an area with many statues of various air monks. When Naruto seated himself and motioned that he was ready, Pathik looked to the sunrise-colored sky and smiled. The fourth chakra is the air chakra, located in the heart. It deals with love, but is blocked by grief. What do you grieve about, Naruto? Naruto closed his eyes and found himself sitting on top of the Hokage monument of Konoha. The village held no buildings and was filled with many trees that reached to the skies. On top of each tree was a different person, ranging from old friends, to surrogate family members, and finally to his parents, godparents, and Gaara on the 5 highest trees. He smiled at the sight of them looking to him with warm gazes, but his smile fell into a look of grief as the people faded into nothingness, leaving nothing more than empty treetops. Outside of his mind, Naruto had tears flowing down his closed eyes while his teeth were gritted and his fists were clenched. Your grief is indeed great, Pathik said with a regretful tone. This chakra was always the hardest for people to get through due to having to remember all of the people that they had lost. However, love is a form of energy. The people you lost, their love has not left this world. It is still inside of your heart, and reformed. In Naruto's mind, the wind picked up around the forested village and 2 people appeared in a small gust right next to him. Grief-filled blue eyes fell upon a pair yellow eyes and a blue-yellow pair. Mai smiled lovingly to him as his daughter looked to him with happiness and love. They slowly approached him and hugged him at the same time, bringing a smile to his tearful face as he returned the embrace. Back outside of his mind, Naruto smiled as the tears from his eyes changed from grief to happiness. As he wiped them, Pathik smiled and said, "Very good. You have opened your air chakra." Naruto nodded and turned to Mai, who looked to him in slight worry before she smiled. He approached her and pulled her into a warm embrace before his lips met hers. Her eyes widened in surprise before she quickly began returning the kiss and wrapped her arms around him. When they separated, he looked to her with a caring smile and stated, "I know I never said this to you, but I love you, Mai." Her eyes grew teary as she hugged him and buried her face into his chest. "I love you too," she whispered. Aang couldn't help but smile at the scene while Pathik chuckled warmly. "Well, shall we move on to the next chakra?" Hera. "So, what are your plans now?" asked Ursa to her 2 children, Iroh and Ty Lee. Right now, we're waiting for Naruto to finish with whatever he and Mai are doing, Zuko answered. Azula sighed and leaned her chair against the wall behind her. Which we have no idea when that will be. She grumbled, making Ursa chuckle good-naturedly. Azula gained a small smile at that. Seeing her mother again, seeing her look at her with eyes full of love and not of demand, hate, or fear, was the happiest she had felt in such a long time. She was glad that she took up Naruto on his offer. Flashback. She was seated in Naruto's Kamui realm, thinking over his offer. The only memories she had of her mother, that she could recall, were of her fussing over Zuko and leaving her with her friends. It made her jealous of Zuko for having all of Ursa's attention while the only parental figure she could always rely on was her father. However, now that she thought about it, her father never talked to her like a daughter. He treated her like any other of his subjects, demanding respect, giving little attention, and only showing interest when it either intrigued him or he saw some gain in it. Was everything she believed to be good in life a lie? She wasn't sure, but her memory sure as hell didn't dissuade that line of thought. She sighed before she looked up to the dark void that made up the realm's sky and called out, "Uzumaki, I've made my decision." It didn't take too long for the blonde to appear in a temporal swirl with his arms crossed and a neutral look on his whiskered face. "And your decision is?" She took a breath before nodding. "I'll join you, if only to finally be able to get answers and try to find my mother." The Uzumaki smiled to her as his red eye looked intently at her. "I promise that you won't regret this, Azula." The next thing she knew, she was in a fancy room inside a house in Bossing Sei with Naruto and Mai next to her. Azula turned to them and actually gave Mai a real smile. "It's good to see you again, Mai." The Nara descendant nodded and gave a small smile back. "Glad to have you back, Azula." End flashback. "You were right, Uzumaki. I don't regret this at all," thought the Fire Princess as she and her mother finally had a chance to bond after so long. Eastern Air Temple. The fifth chakra is the sound chakra, located in the throat. It deals with truth but is blocked by lies, the ones we tell ourselves. "What have you led yourself to believe, Naruto?" Puthik asked as the group sat in a small garden with a pond between the guru and the sage. Naruto searched his mind for what he fooled himself into believing and frowned. "I always thought that people could change, if given the chance. I thought that every person could escape their own grief. But I was wrong. Sasuke, Obito, and even Madara. All three of them were beyond saving. Sasuke couldn't get over how his people were betrayed, Obito wouldn't let go of the idea of peace under subjugation, and Madara just wanted to watch the world burn. Sometimes, the truth is much harder to accept than the lies we tell ourselves. But, we cannot lie to ourselves forever. Sooner or later, we have to open our eyes to the cold reality that is the real world and wake up from the dream world we wish to live in. You have done so by admitting that you can't save or change everyone, and have successfully opened your sound chakra. Well done, Naruto." The blonde nodded in thanks as he and the other two followed Puthik to the avatar sanctuary of the Air Temple. Seated amongst the many statues of past avatars, Naruto couldn't help but feel impressed at the aura of the room. It had a sense of pride and accomplishment, but also had an undertone of shame or regret, the last two representing the avatars that believed they had failed the world. The sixth chakra in the spiritual chain is the Light Chakra, located in the forehead. It deals with insight, but illusion blinds us from it. The greatest illusion of this world. What do you believe it is, Naruto? Naruto raised a brow at the question before he went over the actions of the world in the past. The people fought for their respective homes or pride, but they all failed to realize one thing. We live separately, but in actuality we are all one great nation, answered the blonde, making Puthik nod with a smile. Correct. We live as though divided, but we are in fact one and the same. Even the separated elements are an illusion. We take pride in our respective natural element, but people fail to see that all elements in the world are our natural element. I get it. Naruto said before he chuckled. I'm living it now with the 5 elements flowing through me for my personal use. Puffik nodded again and declared, that is 6 chakras down. Now, for your 7th and final one. I want you and Aang to meet me on the roof when the stars are out. That is the best time for this chakra. Both Sage and Avatar nodded as they all waited for the day to end. Aang spent this time meditating over whether or not to accept letting go of Katara or not. As for Naruto and Mai? The Nara descendant, with a blush that nearly matched Hinata's, asked the man she loved to share a most sacred act with her, making love. At first, Naruto was apprehensive since he didn't want Mai to believe that she had to go through with the idea right away. But she told him that she truly wanted to be with him, fully and completely. She wanted to become one with him, and show him how much he meant to her. The time they had together would never be forgotten by them. By the time it was night, the group of 4 were seated on the rooftop underneath the starry sky. Mai was practically glowing and couldn't stop blushing when she looked to the man she gave her most sacred possession to. Naruto felt happier than he had in a long time and couldn't help but smile at the memory of his time with Mai. While Aang was lost on what their expressions meant, Puffik knew and was happy for the new couple. Before we begin, he said before he turned to the Avatar, have you reached your decision, Aang? The young monk sighed as he thought over the choice before him. It hurt, it really did, but he nodded and declared, I'll do whatever it takes. He then entered a meditative pose and concentrated on his inner spiritual energy. To Aang, it felt like hours, but the others only waited for about 5 minutes before Aang's tattoos shone a bright white along with his eyes and Puffik smiled at him. When the light died down, the guru stated, you did well, Aang. Your 7 chakras are now open and the Avatar state is yours to call upon at will. Congratulations. The monk nodded with a smile before he moved to sit away from Naruto, so that the blonde could be the main focus. Alright Naruto, are you ready? At his nod, Puffik stated, the final chakra is the thought chakra, located on the crown of the head. It deals with pure cosmic energy, but your earthly attachments keep you from achieving it. Think of what ties you to this world, Naruto. The blonde didn't have to concentrate long for this one. It was obvious that Mai was his attachment, but then the fact that she was his spiritual block came and smacked him in the face. I have to let her go, don't I? He asked the guru, who nodded with a serious face. Yes, you do. She keeps you rooted here, and the only way to enlighten your spirit is to let her go. Naruto looked to the woman he had just shared a wonderful moment with, and she looked him dead in the eye. Crystal blue met piercing amber as the two conveyed a silent message to one another. It wasn't until Mai actually smiled to him that he figured it out. I get it. She holds me here physically, but that doesn't mean that I won't see her again, Naruto said in realization, which made Puffik smile at the Uzumaki finding out the answer. That is correct. We may lose our loved ones physically, but the ones who love us never really leave us. You have discovered the answer, Naruto. Now, you just need to let the pure cosmic energy flow through you. Naruto nodded and entered his mind by focusing on his 7th chakra. He found himself standing on a winding trail of pure purple energy with a silhouette of himself holding a swirling mass of power in its hand, much like how he holds a Rasengan. He stepped into the energy and let it fill him completely, refilling the feeling of his chakra flowing through his body. Suddenly, the energy began to move towards his natural eye as 2 wisps of bright blue energy appeared. The wisps formed into his late parents who both smiled to him proudly. Naruto, they spoke simultaneously, we give to you, the energy began to enter his blue eye, our will of fire. Their energy mixed with the energy entering his eye and Naruto felt it surge inside of him. Power unlike anything he had felt before filled him, and his mind was engulfed in a flash of light. On the outside, Naruto's chakra surged and swirled around him, whipping up the wind and slowly cracking the rooftop he sat on top of. The others used their arms to shield their eyes as they saw the chakra slowly converge into a single strand and go into his left eye. As soon as it was fully engulfed into the eye, a burst of pure force pushed out, and nearly knocked them all away had they not braced themselves for it. Finally, the Uzumaki opened his eyes and I gasped at the sight of a Sharingan in the right eye while the left held an eye that was a pale purple with concentric black rings that seemed to ripple around the single dot-like pupil. Pufix smiled at the sight and merely murmured, "It is done." Chapter 18, Drums of War. Naruto stared at one of the many waterfalls of the Eastern Air Temple, looking into the two dojutsu that now made up his eyes, a Sharingan right eye and a Rinnegan left one. A look of depressed remembrance crossed his features as he thought of his fellow Jinchuriki sporting the same eyes back when he and Kurabi were pursuing Obito, before Naruto knew his real identity. To the blonde, these eyes were haunting reminders of the very tools that his most powerful adversary used, the eyes of a madman seeking to place the world under his thumb. This was the scene that Mai walked in on. Her amber eyes softened as she saw her lover and teacher looking at his reflection as if in a trance. She had just seen Aang off as he made to return to Ba Sing Se and to his friends. If she had the date right, then the Nara's friends were being taken there as well, but she had no idea how. All Naruto told her was that some allies were doing him a favor. She mentally shook her head to clear it before she approached the Uzumaki from behind. When she reached him, she wrapped her arms around him from behind, burying her face into his back. "My," whispered the blonde, making her squeeze him tighter. "Don't think about it, Naruto. It will only make you more upset," she whispered back. "You're not like that man, and you never will be." She then let him go so he can turn and look at her. "You're not Obito, you're Naruto, my teacher, my friend," and she smiled at him, eyes full of love, "the man I gave my heart to." He looked to her in slight surprise, grateful for the words she said and the feelings she emitted. He felt nothing but determination, compassion, and love from her aura, which caused him to give a small smile and nod. "You're right. I'm not like him," he said as he looked at his reflection, imagining his friends and family standing beside him with Mai and his unnamed daughter at the front of the others. "And I never will be, I promise." Mai nodded with a smile and made to head back up to the outside of the temple, but Naruto stopped her by grabbing her wrist. When she looked back, she saw he looked, dare she say, nervous. "What's wrong?" He kept his gaze averted before he took a small breath and looked at her. "I never told you about the vision I had in the swamp, did I?" Confused at the question, she still shook her head negatively. It was true that he never told anyone what he saw, but he seemed to be a little happier after that day. She remembered telling Naruto what she saw, and all it did was help prove that she was a Nara, but it still made him smile seeing that she was a descendant of one of his closest friends. Naruto sighed and had her sit alongside him. "In the swamp, I was met by 3 people. 2 of them were my parents, Minato, my father, and Kushina, my mother. They told me that they loved me, and that they were proud of who I became. They also warned me about the Jubi getting free and about the sacrifices I've made." She nodded, showing that she understood, before she asked, "What about the third person?" This was when he looked nervous, and even had a very faint blush on his face. "Well, the third person didn't give her name. However, she said that she was our future daughter." Her blush could have made a cherry jealous. "Daughter?" she gasped with a stutter. He nodded. "Yeah. She told me about the Jubi also and about how I still had one last sacrifice to make." He looked her in the eye and placed a hand gently on her stomach, his fingers gently pressing the fabric of her clothes against her skin. "I don't know if you are now, or if you will be soon, but the last sacrifice was me." She closed her eyes and let a couple of tears fall from them. "So, that dream you had so long ago will really happen, won't it? The one where we live and you die?" He nodded sadly. "Yes, it will." The Nara slammed into him, sobbing against his chest and making him wrap his arms around her in hopes of calming her down. A lone tear fell from his left eye as he kept whispering comforting words into her ear. When she seemed to calm down, she whispered something, but he couldn't hear it. "What did you say?" "Kikyo," she said, again in a whisper, though one he could hear. "Kikyo." Mai looked to him with a teary-eyed smile. "Her name. Our daughter's name." I always planned on naming my first daughter that, while the boy would be named Zephyr. His eyes widened slightly before they softened and his mind went back to his meeting with the girl. Kikyo. Kikyo Nara Uzumaki. You know, that sounds just right. I agree. It seems to fit her quite well. Glad you approve, my friend. What do you think? Asked Mai, bringing him back from his thoughts. He smiled to her and pulled her in for a loving kiss before he answered, I think it's perfect. Fire Nation. In his throne room, Ozai sat in thought with a deep frown marring his features. His son and brother were seen as traitors to the nation. Azula and Ty Lee weren't close to finding Mai and the Uzumaki based on her latest report, and he had an army to build to take down Ba Sing Se. As he pondered on this, the doors opened and a messenger came in with a scroll for him. No doubt it's Azula's latest report, he thought as he looked over the letter. His already furrowed brow fell deeper in its frown as he finished reading. An eclipse of the sun. Will be powerless during that time, and it allows the perfect opportunity for an invasion of the capital. He stood up from his throne, the flames flickering away, and stepped into his war room so that he could overlook the map of the world once more. According to Azula, she had taken control of a group of secret earthbenders known as the Dai Li who worked right under the Earth King's very nose. He smirked at the thought of no longer really needing an army to take over the city when it could be taken from the inside. He figured that, with Azula taking over the Earth Kingdom, he could send a force much smaller than he originally intended to keep a tight leash on the city, while the larger surplus of his army could keep guard over the capital. He'd need to ensure that they prepare for non-bending combat as well for during the time of the eclipse. It also wouldn't hurt to hire mercenaries who specialize in fighting benders without the using of bending of their own. If he remembered right, there were a group of archers called the Yu Yen warriors. Zhao had once employed them, and they were almost successful in taking down the Avatar. The only advantage the boy had over them was his manipulation of the air, which allowed him to escape. They would be useful in taking down enemy invaders from afar with their mastery of the bow. Another group would be the rough rhinos, who each specialize in a different weapon, save for the captain who was a firebender. Still, they would be useful, and if all else fails with them, they were also expendable. They'd need a group who capitalizes on naval warfare, so it'd be best to search ports for anyone willing. There always is some group of pirates or sailors who would do any job, so long as the pay is good. One last group needed would be some trump cards of unmatched skill. He smirked as he recalled rumors of a man with metallic limbs as well as a once revered swordsman. His smirk became a dark grin as he called for a messenger. It was time to call on a man with 3 eyes and an old master of the sword. Ba Sing Se, 1 week later. You really think this will work, Uzumaki? We'd have to really sell it, you know, stated Azula with her arms crossed as she leaned against the wall of Earth King K's war room. After all, father won't be fooled so easily. You give my brother too much credit, Iroh said with a small smile. Ozai was never one for details so long as the job he wanted done was completed. So long as we convince him that Zuko was responsible, and that you both took the city, he'll accept it. You two will return as heroes while I'll be imprisoned as a traitor. I don't want to be seen as a hero for something like that though. Zuko yelled angrily. And you won't just go to prison, you'll be placed in the capital prison. I can't let you do that, uncle. Enough! Roared Naruto while unconsciously using chakra to increase the gravity in the room. The plan is already made and we're going through with it. K has even sent some of his soldiers to inform the people, while the Dai Li are prepared to follow Azula's orders for a temporary period. Iroh knows exactly what he's getting into, Zuko. You two need to focus on your part, being the returned son and daughter of Ozai. Zuko scowled at that while Azula nodded. Ty Lee, growing worried about Zuko's anger, walked up to him and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. When his amber eyes met her stormy gray ones, she offered him a reassuring smile and said nothing. It seemed to work when he calmed down and nodded to her in thanks. Are you sure this is a good idea? asked Aang as he and his friends stood on the other end of the large table that mapped the world. If the world thinks I'm dead, they'll lose hope and may even just surrender to the Fire Nation. No, they won't, Naruto stated with conviction. As of this moment, my old association is spreading the word all over the 4 nations. The world will be told that you will disappear for a short time, but they will also be told that you will return and that the war will end soon. Soon. Do you think they'll listen? Katara asked. Some people won't believe you or even turn against their homes in favor of the Fire Nation. Not to mention the ones that will go into a panic at Aang needing to disappear for a good while, Sokka added. The world could fall to paranoid riots. This may sound ironic, but even I can see how much hope the world has placed in Twinkletoes, Toph stated. Take away that hope, even if it's temporary, and they'll lose it. I'm well aware of the weight the Avatar has on his shoulders, being the only person in this room who's been in his position. However, the world survived 100 years of his absence. They can surely live another couple of months. You may believe otherwise due to the fear in the eyes of the people regarding the Fire Nation, but humanity is a stubborn and resilient race. They don't have it in them to just live or die on their knees when they still have 2 feet to stand tall on. The blonde stood up from his seated position, his powerful gaze gleaming in determination. We can't quit now when the war isn't even the biggest issue. Now that Aang has control of his avatar state, he needs to learn fire bending and how to fight in the spirit world. I'll be fighting the Jubi alone? Questioned Aang in a panic. Are you crazy? I can't fight that thing if it's what you said it was. Relax, you are not fighting it. You're going in there to do one of 2 things. Holding up one finger, the Uzumaki stated, you can try and use your power as the spiritual bridge to seal away the Jubi. He then held up a second finger and declared, or you can bring it to the mortal plane, where I will battle it. Alone? Asked Ty Lee in worry. But can you really dash? He can do it, Mai said, standing next to the man she loved with a fire in her eyes. If anyone can defeat it, it's Naruto and Kurama. Together, they're the only ones strong enough to do so. She then looked to Aang and softly added, but I seriously hope they won't have to. Aang saw that the fire in Mai's eyes changed to a look of pleading, of desperation. She was practically begging him to find a way to seal the Jubi, but he wasn't sure how he'd be able to. Still, he couldn't stand seeing the desperate look and nodded in hopes of reassuring her. It seemed to work when she gave him a nod in return. If that is all, Kay began, getting their attention, then shall we begin? The people have been informed and, while scared of what may happen, they are prepared to wait for Aang's return. The others all nodded and Dai Li escorted Iroh away, where he'd take his role as the captured traitor. Azula, Zuko, and Ty Lee all left to help Azula's men take over the city while the gang prepared to leave with Kay. The Earth King had decided to head to Chameleon Bay, where most of his soldiers would hide out at while the others would gather Hakoda and Bato before heading out to get Aang a fire-bending instructor. Iroh and Zuko informed the airbender of a group known as the Sun Warriors that would probably help him out. As for Naruto and Mai, the blonde decided to wait for the others in the Fire Nation. When he asked Mai which place would be the closest and safest, she told him that there was a cove known as the Black Cliffs which was rarely visited or patrolled, a perfect place for the armies to meet up. Naruto needed time to prepare for the upcoming war, and his first step was learning how to use his new Rinnegan eye. The Rikudo, also known as the 6 Paths, would be a great challenge for him, especially since each demanded a different skill set. The paths were known as the Deva, Asura, Human, Animal, Preta, and Naraka, with all of them together acting on the whim of the outer path. The Deva path granted the user the ability to manipulate attractive and repulsive forces with objects and people. These gravity-manipulating techniques, however, cannot be performed in rapid succession. The amount of time required recharging the jutsu after use varies depending on the scale of the technique used, 5 seconds being the basic minimum. The Deva path also granted another ability known as the Chibaku Tensei, planetary devastation, which allows the user to create a huge makeshift terrestrial body from all the surrounding matter that is attracted to a black sphere released by this technique. The Azura path granted the user the ability to summon mechanized armor, augmenting their body with extra limbs and mechanical weaponry. From his memories of his fight with his fellow Uzumaki, Naruto remembered that Nagato channeled the Azura path through the use of extra limbs that doubled as weapons, and mechanical inner parts. The human path granted a Rinnegan user the ability to read the mind of any target by placing his or her hand on the target's head or chest and yanking the soul out of the body. Though it provides intel by getting well-guarded secrets, the technique inevitably kills the target. Naruto remembered that Shizune was a victim of this technique before she was given her life back. The animal path granted a Rinnegan user the ability of summoning various animals and creatures to aid them in battle. These creatures appeared to be immortal, as Naruto remembered that they were once killed by Jiraiya, but Nagato later summoned them again during their fight. On another note, Naruto also noticed that the summoning creatures through the animal path required no blood sacrifice or hand seals. Tactics-wise, Naruto deduced that the animal path's primary role in battle appeared to consist of overwhelming multiple opponents with a barrage of summons. The Preta path seemed to only have a single ability that Naruto doubted would help him. After all, with the era of chakra and jutsu over, the blonde doubted that the path would be able to absorb bending techniques in the same way the Preta absorbed chakra. The Naraka path grants the user two main abilities, interrogation and restoration, by using the King of Hell. Interrogation required physical contact while restoration required the body of the target of interest, but Naruto remembered that it was mainly for fixing non-living things, like the paths Nagato used or the bodies of the Edo Tensei, in pure world resurrection. The final path was known as the Outer Path, or the Life/Death Master. It allowed the user the ability to control life and death by reviving the dead. However, Naruto remembered that it only affected others and not the wielder. As for Mai, she got to work on creating her Raitun-empowered Rasengan in Sage mode. She and a couple of clones all sat together in a circle, coming up with different theories for the final product. She finally came up with two different designs, but only one seemed to fit her need for making the Rasengan long range. She came up with Senpo Raitun, Rasen Yajirushi, Sage Art Lightning Release, Spiral Arrow. The details of the technique were still sketchy to her, but she and four clones were hard at work with making the idea a reality for the final battle. 1. After around a month and a half, Naruto had an understanding of the Rinnegan that was battle-ready while Mai was just shy of making her original jutsu more than an idea. The others wouldn't be coming for another 2 weeks, on the day of Black Sun. It was night time when Naruto and Mai sat together with some fish cooking on a small fire. The moon was halfway full, and would be full on the day of the eclipse, but its light still bathed the cove they were in while the clear skies allowed the stars to be seen fully. Mai sighed contentedly at the peaceful atmosphere. It was times like this that helped calm her stress and helped her forget that the world was falling to chaos. Her gaze turned to Naruto, who was on his back with his head rested in his hands, staring at the starry sky. She smiled at seeing her lover so relaxed and calm. She knew he needed moments like these more than she did, and a part of her mind egged her on to do something bold. With a faint blush, she stood up and lied down beside him before she moved closer, so that her head rested on his chest. Another content sigh escaped her lips before she looked up to Naruto at the same time he looked down to her. Both of them smiled and leaned in for a soft kiss while their emotions began to rise. Lemon starts taking a risk here with this. The kissing soon became more heated, and the Uzumaki pulled the Nara on top of him, while she caressed his whiskered cheeks and kept her lips attached to his. When they pulled back, Mai gave a teasing smirk before she boldly licked his whiskered cheek, making him freeze at the intensely pleasurable feeling. She giggled lightly at his frozen expression before she said, "I never knew you were so sensitive there." "Heh. I suppose even you have a weakness." He shook himself out of the expression and grinned at her, making her grow nervous before he rolled their bodies, so that he was on top and leaned down to lick and tease her earlobes, while playing with her breasts through her close, making her moan loudly. "I'm not the only one with a weakness, Mai," he whispered into her ear, his hot breath almost making her mind go fuzzy. He went back to his ministrations, making her slowly go wild with pleasure. "Oh. she moaned before she grabbed the back of his head and pushed it to her breasts. Naruto. Using his teeth, he tore at her clothing and exposed her chest wrappings, something she wore to help keep her clothing more streamlined. Once he removed those as well, his tongue moved over to her exposed nipples and began to flick against them, making her moans increase in volume. Enough! She cried through her pleasure as she pushed herself off of the ground and on top of Naruto before she kissed him. I'm not one to accept charity, she teased before she moved herself lower and used a kunai to cut his pants and boxers, exposing his pleasure stick to her. Her eyes gained a slight glint to them at his impressive size before she began to lick it like a frozen popsicle. Naruto shivered in pleasure at her actions, and he let loose a slight moan as she used her free hands to pump his cock and fondle his balls. That's, Okami, so good. He groaned out through his pleasure. He nearly cried out in it when Mai's mouth engulfed his cock and began to suck on it. She looked to him and hummed out a chuckle, making her mouth vibrate around the blonde's genitals and cause them some added pleasure. Naruto was practically in heaven from her actions, but he wouldn't let her just give pleasure. Shifting their bodies into a 69 position, Naruto did the same tactic of cutting her bottoms with a kunai before he began to blow softly against her nether lips. Her body shivered at the feeling, but she tried to keep her focus on the dick she was sucking on. However, her mind nearly blanked when his tongue ran across her folds and flicked her clit. He smirked and teased, having trouble there, Mai? Not letting her answer, he began his assault on her pussy with his tongue, while poking the inside with a finger. Although the Nara was feeling intense pleasure, she forced herself to focus on Naruto's cock and began to suck on it like no tomorrow. They both kept up their pleasurable acts for some time before Mai couldn't take it anymore and moaned against Naruto's cock and came, her fluids drenching Naruto's face. The moan vibrated against him enough to make him come as well, his milk filling her mouth. Both lovers swallowed the juices that had entered the mouths, though they both had some leaking down their chins. Mai blushed and smiled as she shifted herself so that her entrance was right above his dick, which she held in her hand. Descending, her nether lips opened and her cunt engulfed his cock, which filled her up as her hips met his. Moaning, she rubbed just above her pussy and murmured, "I feel so full." Smirking, Naruto grabbed her hips and began to slowly thrust into her, making her moans increase in tandem and her body feel like it was burning. She moved his hands off of her hips and began to bounce on top of him, each one meeting his thrusts. She moaned with each one, her tongue slowly slipping out of her mouth and hanging limply out of it as her face was one of ecstasy. Slowing his pace slightly, he grabbed her hips again and stood up with her still being speared by his cock. Her legs instinctively wrapped around his waist while her arms did the same around his shoulders and her lips mashed against his. He began to increase the speed and force of his thrusts, driving them both to nearly the breaking point. And that point was broken when Mai whispered against his lips in a tone full of desire and lust, "I love you." This made Naruto's heart swell, and the emotions caused him to release his cum inside of her, driving her wild with pleasure, and her pussy exploded with her own juices. They both fell back, though Naruto cushioned their fall with futon chakra, with Mai on top of him, and still engulfing his cock. Both of them were sweaty, panting, and had love-drunk smiles on their faces. The blonde brought his brunette lover in for one last kiss and whispered, "I love you too." And lemon. Under the starry sky, the two lovers simply lied against one another, their hearts and souls resonating in the afterglow of their love-making. Both were unaware that this night solidified a part of Naruto's vision from many months ago. 2 weeks later, day of black sun. Naruto and Mai stood to the side with Zuko and Azula as Sokka, and his father Hakoda went over the strategy for the battle and rallied the troops. The men and women of the invasion force consisted of earth-bending warriors, the swamp benders, 2 of the freedom fighters once led by Jet, the warriors of the southern water tribes, members of the Order of the White Lotus, the gang, the Children of Fire, Zuko and Azula, Ty Lee, and the last shinobi, Naruto and Mai. Once Hakoda was done, Naruto appeared before the troops in a swirl of wind and stared them all down. "You all know why we're here. You all know what this day is. This is the day the war will finally end and peace will return to the world. All we have are two more obstacles, the last being dealt with by the Avatar and myself. We only have the Fire Nation, who will be weakened this day, and the return of a calamity. I promise you all, on my soul and on my spirit, that Aang and I will defeat this calamity, and chaos will finally be extinguished. The soldiers all began to nod and murmur with confidence. All I ask is that you stand. They did so. That you fight. They all roared out in acceptance. And that you see this day to the very end. That you fight with all the strength of your hearts and for the people you all love. Fight on, soldiers of unity. A loud cheer broke through the cove as everyone roared with confidence and determination, their hearts and minds fully prepared to finally end the war. The Uzumaki moved to stand at the docks with Mai at his side while the soldiers and others all moved out. Mai's amber eyes burned with passionate confidence and she said, "We're gonna win today." "I know it." Nodding, the blonde gazed out to the submerging underwater boats and the armor-covered flying bison, while his two dojutsu eyes took notice of the approaching eclipse. The eyes seemed to glow as he declared, "This war ends, today." Chapter 19, Eclipsing Chaos. Ozai sat in his secret bunker, out of the way of the major fighting that would no doubt take place soon. He was no fool since he knew exactly what day it was, and exactly what was coming. The day of Black Sun had come, and with it an invasion led by that damnable Uzumaki. Even thinking of that damn man's name made the Fire Lord grit his teeth in pure hate. The supposed hero of the flame was now the most powerful adversary of the Fire Nation, the country that once housed Hai no Kuni. It was maddening to him, but he would persevere. He had to so that he could make his plans of rebirthing the world in fire possible. After all, Sozin's comet would follow this eclipse in just under a month, so he couldn't lose today. No. Today would be the end of any major resistance against the Fire Nation, he'd make sure of that. Fire Nation waters. At the bow of one of the Earth Kingdom ships stood the gang along with Hakoda and Bateau. The ship cut through the water as it moved at a relatively quick pace across the small waves. Aang took a deep breath in hopes of calming down his growing nerves, something Katara immediately noticed. She moved next to him before she surprised him with a warm embrace from behind. Due to her slightly taller frame, her eyes were able to see above his bald and marked head as her arms wrapped around his shoulders. "I can't really imagine what you're feeling now, Aang, but you're not alone in this. The rest of us will be with you every step of the way, and plus Naruto is taking the field as well." He sighed after he had slightly relaxed in her arms. The initial feeling left him tense, but he soon felt comfort and a slight reddening of his cheeks. "I know. But I still have the Fire Lord to worry about, not to mention trying to handle the Jubi in the spirit world." He moved from her embrace, making her frown sadly as he gazed upon the open water. "I'm more afraid of losing you guys than failing," he said as he turned slightly to look at her, "especially you, Katara." She had a faint blush on her face, but she smiled at him to reassure him. Stepping up to him again as he turned to fully face her, she brought her arms around his shoulders again and murmured, "I don't want to lose you either, Aang." At that, she leaned in and kissed him, shocking him at first before he quickly got into the feeling and wrapped his arms around her waist and deepened it. Hakoda, Bateau, and Sokka all smiled at the sight from some distance. The southern tribe chief couldn't think of anyone else worthy enough for his only daughter, and he knew that she and Aang would be happy together. Bateau was the same, happy that his niece was able to have a moment like this before the final battle. As for Sokka, he had a feeling the two of them were into each other, and was just happy it finally happened. He trusted Aang and knew he wouldn't hurt Katara. He then turned his head to look at Suki and smiled at her, making her return the gesture with a faint blush. Hakoda and Bateau both chuckled when they saw Sokka make his way over to her. On a water tribe ship, the Fire Children and Ty Lee all stood together. Azula was leaning against the railing while Zuko sat on the deck, and just watched the path the ship was taking. Ty Lee was lying on her back next to him, and watching the clouds. Ever since Mai had suggested it to her many years ago, the acrobat had taken to doing the activity whenever she was tense or nervous. So, this is what that whole calm before the storm thing feels like, huh? She asked as she turned to Zuko. Yeah. This will be the fight of our lives, he answered. Azula sighed as she turned to her brother and friend. And with father leading the opposition, it won't be easy. I wouldn't be surprised if he hired army-sized reinforcements that were specifically non-benders due to the approaching eclipse. Ty Lee sat up and scooted slightly closer to Zuko, making him turn to see her scared visage. Do you think we'll make it out of this? It's hard to say, Azula answered with a sigh. War is both simple and complicated, simple in its overall premise, yet complicated in the strategies that take place. We'll need to stay sharp. The acrobat looked down in worry before she was surprised by Zuko gently placing a hand on her shoulder. Don't worry so much, he reassured her. We'll get through this, somehow. I don't doubt that for a second. She smiled softly at him before she boldly kissed his cheek and whispered, Thanks, Zuko. All the blushing prince could do was nod while Azula smirked at what was happening. Toph was leaning against a resting Appa as she tried to calm her churning stomach. The upcoming battle was not the thing on her mind, she was honestly stoked about it all. No, the issue on her mind was the rocking ship. Blindness and constant swaying from waves were not a good combination. She had already puked once in the Duke's helmet, much to his ire. She was just trying to calm her stomach more than her nerves. Above the army of ships and soldiers was Koyuki with Naruto and Mai seated on her back. Both were dressed for battle with slightly matching gear. Both wore full body suits much like the Jonin of Konoha's prime, A and BU-styled arm guards that were steel gray in color with matching shin guards, black ninja sandals, and armor. The armor was styled the same as the one Naruto had made for him in the Fire Nation. It was made of dozens of metal plates to form solid and protective surfaces with Mai's having a red trim instead of the orange one Naruto had. To finish it off, both wore cloaks over their armor with Naruto's being a stunning silver with the markings that the Rikudo Sannin once had on his cloak on the back in a crimson red. Mai's cloak looked like an exact replica of Naruto's old sage cloak, but her cloak had the Nara symbol on her left shoulder and the Uzumaki symbol on her right. Strapped to Naruto's back was Gaara's old gourd while Mai was given the Gamma Sannin staff to wield while a bow and quiver of arrows were strapped to her back. 1. The Uzumaki had his eyes closed as he sat on the large snowy owl, while Mai sat next to him. You're nervous, she commented. Of course, I am, he answered without opening his eyes. This will be the biggest battle I've had since the North Pole, and even that battle didn't last long. She turned to him, and saw his eyes slowly open as a sigh escaped his lips. She gained a concerned look before she gently grabbed his hand, making him turn to see her giving him a small smile. We'll get through this together, Naruto. You're not alone in this, and I'll be by your side the entire time. He gave her a sad frown and shook his head. No, Mai. I can't have you taking part in the fight against the Jubi. You're not ready for that kind of battle, and I can't lose you, he said as he moved his hand to her stomach. I can't lose Kikyo either. She frowned at him and used her hand to grab his chin and force him to look at her, eyes smoldering with determination. Listen here, Naruto Uzumaki, she began, making him actually blink in surprise at her authoritative tone. I will be fighting beside you and Aang when you both go after the Jubi, and you will not stop me. I will be fine, Kikyo will be fine, and you will be fine. She then kissed him hard on the lips, making him unconsciously return it before she pulled back and finished, I love you too much to not help you. He chuckled with his eyes closed and nodded at her. All right. But promise me that you will leave if you get in over your head. She gave him a firm nod before she added her own condition. And you promise me that you will do your best not to die. He didn't even hesitate when he replied, I promise. Gates of Azulen, around an hour later. Naruto and Mai had joined with the other Fire Nation teens, since the ship they were on was at the front of the fleet. Before them were the raised and enflamed gates that came from two dragon statues that connected to a center statue of the late Fire Lord Azulen. The flames from the barrier were incredibly intense, and the heat was easily felt from where the ships were stationed, at least a mile out. There they are, Azula muttered. Our grandfather's legendary Hellfire Gates. Ty Lee pulled at her collar and fanned her slightly sweating face. I can feel the heat from here. Rumor has it, Zuko began, that these flames are so intense that waterbending won't even douse them. A snort was heard and Naruto stepped up with small funnel of wind around his right hand. They obviously weren't anticipating my own efforts, he commented as he made a slashing motion that dispelled the funnel. A loud, grinding noise was heard before the flaming chain gates fell lifelessly, much to the shock of the Fire Nation soldiers on duty at the gate. But the shock didn't end there, for the statue of Azulen kept making the grinding noise as the top half slowly slid off of its lower half and fell into the sea with a very large splash. And no way! Gasped out a male firebender from his jet ski. That can't be possible. A female bender looked to the fleet of ships before her eyes locked with the twin dojutsu eyes of the Uzumaki, making her face pale. It's Uzumaki! She cried before she felt a probe on her mental psyche and her eyes became blank. Secure us a path, whispered a voice, making her nod with the same blank expression. Yes, Uzumaki-sama, she murmured before she suddenly fired twin bursts of orange flames at the soldiers flanking her, blowing up their jet skis and sending them into the water. She then spun hers around and turned the throttle to full speed as she sped toward the fourth and final soldier. What the hell are you doing? He cried out in shock as he instinctively fired a blast of flame, but she swerved her ski out of the way and slashed his with a fire dagger that resulted in it exploding like the other two. The female soldier then rode up to the ship Naruto was on and saluted. Path is clear, Uzumaki-sama. Good. Now, return to your family and get them away from the conflict. Get as many people out as you can. When she nodded and rode off, he turned his gaze to the front of the ship as the fleet resumed sailing. We aren't murderers, we're liberators. The others nodded and Azula surprisingly spoke up to the other soldiers. He's right, we aren't murderers. We're here to free this enslaved nation, and in turn liberate this world from a tyrant. She raised her right fist into the air with a roar of, for freedom. For freedom! Cried the soldiers in response while Naruto smirked at the princess. You've grown from the spoilt brat you once were. I'm impressed. She smirked back and replied, I had some golden-haired fool open my eyes for me. The two chuckled as they continued to make way to the Fire Nation capital. With Ozai. The Fire Lord scowled as his two elite guards stood beside him. The first was an elderly-looking man with dark skin, gray eyes, a mustache-goatee combo, and had his hair in a top knot. He was dressed in plain Fire Nation robes while a sword and sheath were held behind his back in his clasped hands. The second man was bald and had the same facial hairstyle as the first. His right arm from the elbow down and right leg from the knee down were replaced with highly durable-looking metal limbs, complete with claws for the hand and a bladed tip for the foot. He was dressed in clothes suitable for a common citizen of one of the smaller Fire Nation towns with the shirt open from the abs up, showing his well-toned upper torso. On his forehead was a strange third eye tattoo, while his facial expression was calm, if not indifferent. These two were Piandao, a peerless master of the sword, and a man simply known as Ran Xiao too. Piandao stood calmly, discreetly eyeing the Fire Lord beside him. He secretly despised the man, as well as Fire Lord Azulen, for plunging the world into chaos and war. He wanted nothing more than to take him down as soon as the eclipse started, but he knew it was not his destiny to do so. The Avatar was meant to restore the balance, so he must stand aside and let the Airbender do his duty. He also had been assigned to accept Ozai's order by Iroh in secret, and as a fellow member of the Shiro Range he would fulfill his duty. After all, the very founder of their organization was taking the battlefield. He couldn't wait to see the legendary hero of the flame in action. Fire Nation capital. Naruto stood alone on the deck of the lead ship while clones stood alone on all of the other ships. In front of him was a massive army of Fire Nation soldiers, hired mercenaries, 5 men on Komodo rhinos, and finally a very large ship with no colors that had around 20 men on it, including the man Naruto took the scroll of Suna puppetry from. He and all of his clones stood calmly with their arms crossed defiantly over their chests. Down below were the soldiers of his army, preparing themselves in either the Earth Kingdom tanks, dubbed Slinky tanks, or Water Tribe submarines, dubbed Mecha Fish. The original of the many blondes narrowed his eyes and bellowed to the opposing forces, "People of the Fire Nation, your city and you Fire Lord will fall today at the hands of the soldiers of unity. We do this in the name of peace and for the sake of the world. Surrender now, or accept your choice of facing us in battle." One of the men on the Komodo rhinos stepped forward on his steed. He had bladed bracers on his arms and nothing else, making the Uzumaki assume he was a bender. "You know our answer, traitor. You and your army will fall today at the hands of the Fire Nation, and your head will be delivered to the Fire Lord personally." The other soldiers all roared in agreement, their cries echoing across the water, and making Naruto close his eyes and sigh. "So be it," he muttered to himself as his clones dispersed. He crouched slightly, gathering chakra to his feet, and leapt off of the boat he was standing on before he landed in the water between his army and the Fire Nations. Entering a stance similar to the one Gaara normally took, he pulsed his chakra into the sea beneath him, which began to rise up menacingly. It was only when the army saw green mixed in with the blue water that they noticed that it wasn't the water rising up on its own. No, what rose up was the sea serpent that Naruto had tamed back at the Serpent's Pass. "Suiro, 3, let's show them the wrath of the seas that you domain," he cried, making the serpent cry out in agreement, and before it took a large intake of air that swelled up its stomach. Monk, the man who spoke up earlier and leader of the rough rhinos, tensed at the sight of the serpent's growing stomach before his eyes widened in realization. "Move, that beast's about to fire," he roared to the others as they all scrambled out of the way and headed for their stations. The men on the guard towers took aim with their ballistae armed with harpoons and prepared to fire. It was too late though, for the Suiro released a blast of water that Naruto infused with a razor-sharp gale of wind that increased the power behind the blast. It barely missed the pirate ship, though it did slice into the sails a bit, and crashed into the ground at the docks. However, the attack itself was nothing more than a feint, a distraction that kept the soldiers too occupied to notice the ships quickly releasing their mecha fish that docked at the shore. The fronts of the subs opened and allowed the slinky tanks and the other soldiers to charge out with roars of battle. Leading the charge for the 1st Battalion was Hakoda alongside Bato, Sokka, Suki, and the Water Tribe warriors. They were in charge of handling the frontline fighters of the Fire Nation, which mainly included the mercenaries and rough rhinos. The 2nd Battalion was headed by Toph alongside Pipsqueak and the Duke. They headed the Earth Kingdom soldiers who were not in the slinky tanks. Pipsqueak and the Duke mainly had some explosives that the inventor made for them. They were easy to ignite, and light enough to throw a fair distance. The 3rd Battalion was led by Zuko alongside Azula, Ty Lee, and Katara. They were the assault team and were in charge of taking care of the guard towers and their ballistae. Appa had dropped them off on the high ground to get them close enough to get started. The 4th Battalion was made up of members of the Shiro Renge, White Lotus, and they included some surprise people for members of the gang. Zhongzhong, a firebending master and deserter of the Fire Navy, was there along with the king of Omashu, Bumi, and the waterbending master of the north, Paku. They were in charge of defending any of the struggling battalions and keeping them safe. The tanks made up the support and spear group. Their durable metal bodies supported each battalion on the low ground by giving them some defensive cover while they also pushed through the enemy lines, hence the spear title. Aang and Mai were atop an armored Appa as he flew over the battlefield and drew the attention of the Yuyan archers. Mai proved her prowess with archery as she easily shot down archer after archer from the air. Aang supported her by blocking any arrows that strayed too close, and by firing blasts of air or fire from the skies. From his position in the air, atop his Kazipo, windstep, air platform, Naruto surveyed the battle with a critical eye, taking note of each battalion's progress. He was brought out of his observation when his senses alerted him of the pirates trying to shoot him down with their catapult or some arrows. Smirking at their bravery, he dropped down at full speed and landed in the very center of their main deck, crushing the catapult and nearly splitting the ship in two with his force. He was crouched with his head down as the ship creaked ominously before he jerked up to full height with his arms outstretched, Rinnegan flashing brightly. Shinra Tensei, almighty push. He roared before a blast of pure gravitational force pushed the pirates overboard and finished what his initial landing started by splitting the ship in two. The jutsu's power was so great that the water beneath the docked ship picked up into a large wave that would have looked like a giant ripple in the water from a bird's eye view. The waves picked up by the jutsu pushed to the docks, and allowed the swamp benders to use the seaweed that was carried to fight. Hugh took great advantage of this with his swamp monster suit while Tho and Do led the others of their people. Naruto kicked off of the water he stood on and landed behind them before he turned his gaze to the sky. The moon was covering less than an eighth of the sun, but it was moving at a decent pace. We need to hurry this along, he mused before he went through hand seals and slammed the ground with a roar of Kuchiyos no Jutsu, summoning jutsu. With 1st Battalion. Hakoda bashed another soldier in the face with his shield while he spun and struck down another with his club. He heard a rush of air and ducked just in time to avoid a sloppy sword strike before he mule-kicked the wielder in the pelvis, reducing the man to his knees in tears. Bato used his brother's crouched form to vault over and swing his spear against a duo of soldiers and taking them down. He then grabbed his boomerang and threw it at a firebender that had tried to sneak up from behind some other soldiers, striking them in the face of their helmet. Hakoda smirked at this before he called out, "Sokka, do it now." The younger warrior nodded as he parried a spear tip with his meteorite sword. He had made it with the help of a kind sword master that taught him the ways of the blade, even if he was a water tribesman. He pulled out a handful of black spheres and threw them on the ground, causing a black smoke to erupt and enshroud the water tribesmen in its fog. The tribesmen all raised cloths to cover their faces, so that they could breathe easier as they hid within the plumes. The soldiers caught in the smoke coughed as it burned their lungs and some were forced to blindly run out of it as they suffocated. As soon as they left the black plumes, they were struck by the tribesmen who were waiting just outside. Sokka looked to his father, who nodded, and pulled out a single stick bomb before he tossed it to Suki, who held a lit match. The other stepped back a ways as the teen lit it and threw it into the smoke before she and Sokka rushed away from the impending blast. The result was the bomb going off and igniting the entire plume in an inferno of heat and flame. Sokka grinned at the success along with Suki, before the Kyoshi warrior tackled him to the ground and forced them both to avoid a blast of fire. The two looked up to see the 5 members of the rough rhinos surrounding them, Sokka's father and uncle, and the other tribesmen. "That was a nice strategy, but it's over now," declared the leader, who held a flaming fist threateningly with a cruel smirk. "Now, you'll burn before us to ashes in the name of our Fire Lord." With 2nd Battalion. "Keep advancing. Don't let up for a single second," roared Toph as she stomped the ground and raised a single earth pillar before she punched it repeatedly, firing discs of stone and dirt at the firebenders. Her aim was superb, considering her ailment, and she proved her worth as an earth-bending master to the other soldiers who were following her lead. Pipsqueak and the Duke helped out also by attaching bombs every now and then to some of the earth discs, making them much more potent in taking out large groups of firebenders. The Duke even fired some of the smaller bombs with a slingshot as he sat on Pipsqueak's shoulders. The bombs were weak, no better than a festival firecracker that could be bought at stalls, but they proved to be very useful distractions as the flashes hampered the enemy's vision and left the firebenders open to attack. Toph grinned in excitement at the battle. She was having a blast and putting her earth-bending skills to the test as her seismic sense pointed out who was attacking, who was moving, and who was wide open. "There," she mentally declared as she sent a wave of upturned earth behind her and to the left, catching the firebender by surprise and striking her in the gut. She had thought she could get the drop on the brat, but her thoughts turned into pain as she was launched back and her stomach was left in pure pain. Unable to stop the upcoming reaction, she released the contents of her stomach from the force of the blow and was rendered unconscious. While disgusted, Toph still had her grin in place as she turned to the reinforcing firebenders with her earth-bending brothers and sister taking their stances behind her. She crossed her arms and smirked as she asked confidently, "Who's next?" "With 3rd Battalion." Zuko rolled out of the way of a blast of fire, before he retaliated with his own that struck the man down. Katara was right behind him with her dual water whip striking down 2 more firebenders with quick precision. Azula kept up the assault with a spinning double kick that released 2 streams of bright blue fire and took down the commander of the guard tower they were attacking. Ty Lee was able to sneak past everyone and use her chi blocking to render the soldier commandeering the ballista immobile. She gave Zuko a thumbs up and the team nodded before pulled out his dual sword and sliced the wire for the ballista, in case any soldiers decided to try and use it again. This was the 3rd one they had taken out, and they still had one final one to go. "Let's hurry up and finish," he said, and led the charge to the last one. Azula ran up next to him with a smirk on her face, making him turn to her questioningly. "What's with you?" She just shook her head and looked to him. "I'm just thinking about how we haven't done anything together in years. I actually miss the times when we played together as children." He gave a small smile at that and turned his gaze to the next ballista. "Me too." "With 4th Battalion. Zhong, make your way to the prison." "We need to get our Grand Lotus out of his cage," Pakku said to the fire-bending master. The deserter nodded and took a small group of 3 with him as they went through the enemy lines and made their way to Iroh. Pakku meanwhile used the jars filled with water, provided by the inventor on a mechanical cart, to create the famous octopus waterbending stance. The 8 limbs of water acted as a perfect blend of offensive water whips and defensive water grapples. To many of his waterbending brethren, he looked to be one with water, swaying and moving like a calm river, but attacking with the deadliness of a raging ocean. Bumi was having a ball with his earthbending, much like the blind bandit. With rapid succession, he shot boulder after boulder at his targets and struck each one down with deadly efficiency. He also sent out tremors to throw them off balance, created fissures to trap them, and made dozens of earth pillars to supply his fellow earthbenders with ammunition. With his famous snort of laughter, he raised his leg like a sumo wrestler would and slammed it down, creating his biggest tremor and throwing off the aim of dozens of firebenders before the other members of the White Lotus took the opportunity to take them out. "I see you're having fun," commented an amused voice, making the king of Omasha turn to see Naruto calmly walking up behind him. With a grin that many would call mad, he replied, "What's the point of participating in an invasion if you don't have fun?" Naruto shook his head in amusement as he had the sand within his gourd drive into the earth next to him and grind the surrounding ground around him. Setting his face into one of a commander, he ordered, "Have everyone fall back. I'm gonna clear a path for us to the main city." The mad genius nodded and had his fellow Lotus members spread the word. Meanwhile, Naruto turned his gaze skyward and smirked as he saw me shoot down the last of the Yuyan archers just a few seconds before the final guard tower was taken out. "Won't be long now," he murmured as his sand kept grinding away. With Zhong, the deserter and his 3 subordinates were able to make it to the capital city with little resistance. A small force of 4 was hardly noticeable after all compared to an army of invaders. However, the man was thoroughly confused to see, from his higher vantage point, that the city looked empty. Not a person in the streets or a soldier lying in wait. "Something is not right here," he muttered before he turned to the other 3. "Go search the city for any citizens or soldiers before returning to Bumi and Pakku. Report to them what you find while I go find Master Iroh." "Sir." They saluted before they left to check the city. Zhong quickly went in a different direction and made his way to the capital prison. Again, there were no soldiers patrolling the surrounding area, and it worried the man greatly. Cautiously, he kept pressing on before the entrance was in sight. Taking time to check his surroundings, he saw no one yet again, and his eyes narrowed in frustration. "This cannot be right. They must have known we were coming somehow and created a force to give the illusion that someone was here. Hopefully Master Iroh is still here so that we can rescue him." He was broken out of his musing by a shout of panic, the sound of fire being launched, and the sight of the doors of the prison being flung open as a man was blasted out and onto the ground in a groaning heap. The deserter looked up from his gazing of the unconscious man, and saw Iroh stepping out of the prison. The man was wearing just his prison bottoms, and his very fit torso was left bare to see. He gave Zhong a greeting nod, and the man bowed to the Grand Lotus. "Master Iroh." "It is an honor," he greeted. "The honor is mine," he returned kindly before he turned serious. "I take it that the invasion has long since begun?" "Yes, sir." Master Uzumaki and his companions were quick to get the forces rallied together for the invasion. "I was ordered to free you and return you to our forces, but I can see that you didn't need it." The Grand Lotus chuckled in good nature before the two fire-bending masters rushed off to join their fellow soldiers. 1st Battalion versus Rough Rhinos. Sokka and Suki rolled out of the way of another blast of fire, before the male warrior used his sword to parry the blade of the Guan Dao that another member tried to strike him with. Suki used the deadlock to her advantage and performed a handspring off of Sokka's shoulder before she kicked the Rough Rhino member in the face and knocked him off of his beast. She was quick to follow with a chop to the man's throat that caused him to gasp for air before he fell unconscious. Sokka quickly pulled out his boomerang and threw it with perfect precision at another member that was readying an arrow on his bow. The markings on his face were similar to those of the Yuyan archers, so the Water Tribe warrior didn't want to take any chances. The boomerang cut through the air and sliced both the bow and the bowstring, rendering the weapon useless and surprising the archer before he was knocked unconscious by the boomerang's return trip to his skull. Hakoda used his shield to constantly block the chain weapon of a fourth member of the Rough Rhinos and used his club to swing at the man. After raising his shield to block for what felt like the sixth time, he swung his club at the chain before the man could pull it back, causing it to wrap around his club. With a smirk while the man had a look of worry, Hakoda yanked his ensnared club and pulled the man right off of his Komodo rhino, while the chain slackened and freed his weapon. The man looked up just in time to see the club knock his lights out. Bateau was kept on his toes as the fifth member of the Rough Rhinos, a masked man, kept launching small stick bombs at him. If the tribe warrior was honest with himself, he saw the other man's style of fighting as cowardly and it irritated him. Finally having enough, Bateau tossed away his shield, due to the weight, and rushed his opponent. The man was quick to retaliate with another thrown bundle of bombs, but Bateau had a counter for that, though it was a risky one. Bringing the spear tip of his weapon down in mid-run, the blade stabbed into the ground, and the momentum caused Bateau to rise up with his spear and allowed him to vault over both the bombs and the masked man. As soon as he landed behind the man, Bateau swung his spear in a wide arc and clocked the man in the head, knocking him both off his rhino and unconscious with the strike. The leader of the Rough Rhinos growled at seeing his men get taken out while his four opponents all regrouped together. With fury in his eyes, the man fired repetitious blasts of fire that caused them scatter in order to avoid. He quickly found himself surrounded on all of his cardinal points, which made him growl in even further rage. Unknown to them, up in the air Mai was readying another arrow, and had her sights set on the Rough Rhino member. As Appa circled the battlefield again, she caught sight of her opening, released the arrow. It flew through the air and descended at a rapid pace as a smirk found its way to her face. "I won't fall here," raged the leader. "You hear me? I won't fall." He was cut off from finishing as the arrow found its way to the center of his back. Blood dribbled from his lips as he seemed to fall off the side of his Komodo rhino in slow motion. With a thud, he fell to the ground with blank eyes. The four that had surrounded him sighed in slight relief before many of the soldiers heard many shouts of, "Clear the way." They all turned their gazes to the source of the shouts before they saw the blonde leader of their forces surrounded by a large amount of ground-up earth and sand. Seeing the sand rise up in many spots, they quickly cleared the way between the Uzumaki and the remaining Fire Nation forces. The blonde clapped his hands together as the sand converged in front of him and began to rise up as a large wave. Higher and higher it rose before its peak height of 15 feet inched forward slightly. Disappear, muttered the Jinchuriki before he roared, "Ryusa Bakuryu, quicksand waterfall flow." The sand wave's tip continued its forward motion at the blonde's declaration before it raged toward the enemy forces like a raging tsunami of ground-up earth and mineral. The soldiers panicked and quickly turned to run, but they weren't fast enough to avoid being submerged in the sand while the invasion force was left untouched due to Naruto controlling the flow of the wave. By the time the wave was finished in its destructive path, the forces of the Fire Nation were fully buried in sand and the Uzumaki cut off his flow of chakra, while his gourd filled itself up with the leftover sand. Looking up, the blonde's eyes narrowed as the eclipse was nearly starting. It was now less than a quarter away from beginning. Aang! He called out, prompting the avatar to land Appa in front of the shinobi. It's almost time. The airbender nodded with a small look of worry as Naruto pulled out a seal tag with the kanji 4 doorway and spirit on it. Get ready, he stated as the two noticed everyone putting on the goggles the inventor created to protect their eyesight. The light from the sun finally dimmed fully as the sun was fully eclipsed by the moon. Aang's tattoos began to glow a bright white as he entered his avatar state, while Naruto placed the seal tag on the boy's chest. Remember, either seal it away with the power of the past avatars, or bring it out here for me to deal with. The avatar nodded as the seal tag let off a bright golden glow, and the airbender disappeared in a swirl of light. Spirit world. Aang opened his eyes to a shocking sight, a war zone. Craters, trenches, rubble, and bodies littered the area. Each person he saw had headbands similar to the one Naruto wore, but they all had the same symbol that looked to be ancient writing, for. What happened here? He asked in slowly growing horror. A war beyond any before it, child, answered an elderly voice, making the monk turn to see a man that gave off a very powerful aura. The man was a tall and gray-skinned person that had deep wrinkles, a long goatee reaching his waist, and short grayish-red shaggy hair, which spiked up at the top and had a chin-length braid hanging in front of his left ear. He had pronounced eyebrow ridges with small, horn-like protrusions above them, as well as a red ripple-like marking in the center of the forehead, similar to the eye Naruto referred to as Rinnegan. He wore a white, full-length kimono with a pattern of 6 black magatama around a high collar, beneath which he wore a necklace which was also made up of 6 magatama. On the back of his kimono was a larger ripple-like marking with a pattern of 9 magatama arranged in 3 rows of 3 beneath it. Who are you? Asked Aang as he saw the man floating before him in a seated position, as if he was meditating. The man gave an amused smile as he answered, I am Hagoromo Otsutsuki, the founder of Ninshu, Shinobi sect, or the faith of Shinobi. However, many know of me as the Rikudo Sannin and the father of ninjutsu. You're the one Naruto told us about, the one that sealed the Jubi into the moon? Half right. I sealed the body into the moon and split the power into 9, creating the Bijou. As he said this, 8 great beasts appeared around them. The first was a brown raccoon dog made of sand with dark blue markings on it. The second was a 2-tailed cat made of blue and black fire that had a green left eye and yellow right one. The third was a sea green turtle with 3 tails and a red underbelly, and its only visible eye was its left one with a red scara and yellow pupil. The fourth had 4 tails and looked like a gorilla with red fur, pale yellow skin, and lava orange eyes. The fifth looked to be a white horse with 5 tails and a dolphin-shaped face, while its red-rimmed green eyes stared down at Aang. A 6-tailed slug with white skin and 2 feet was next with a constant leakage of fluid from its skin. Seventh was a large beetle with a single tail and 6 wings, which Aang deduced were counted as its tails for a total of 7. The last one looked to be a humanoid being with octopus legs as its lower half, a bull-shaped head that had the left horn cut off halfway, and pure white eyes. These are 8 of the 9, with the 9th being sealed into the Uzumaki that you speak of. In order, they are Shikaku, Matatabi, Isabu, Son Goku, Kokuo, Saiken, Chome, and Gyuki. The last of them is named Dash. Karama, finished Aang, making Hagoromo smile. Correct. When they were 1, they were known as Jubi. However, what many people do not know is that the Jubi was actually the source of Ninshu. For you see, my mother would have never been able to receive the power I was born with if she hadn't eaten the fruit of the Shinju, or God tree. The Jubi is a tree? Asked a shocked airbender. But how did it become the calamity it is feared for? Finished the sage. Rage against my mother and I for not returning what my mother took caused the Shinju to mutate and deform into a beast with 10 tails that held a terrible wrath and an even more worrisome power. Driven only by instinct and by the will of its once tree-like form, it almost destroyed the entire world before I stepped forth to face it. The result was me becoming its Jinchuriki, the very first Jinchuriki. Wow! Breathed out the Avatar as he sat on a nearby piece of rubble. His gray orbs turned to the battlefield once more and he asked, "This was the war Naruto took part in, wasn't it? This was the result?" Hagoromo nodded somberly. "Yes. This wasteland of earth and humans is partially my fault, and my mother's. If she had not taken from the tree and birthed me, then the energy known as chakra would have never existed. We could have lived in harmony with the residents of this world we reside in now much earlier than the time of the very first Avatar." Aang frowned sadly as he looked to the ground at his feet, lost and confused on what to do. Hagoromo saw this and floated over to him as the images of the first 8 Bijou left. "What can I do?" asked the young teen. "I'm no hero or savior. I ran away from my own home and doomed my people to die because of my own fear. Naruto called the avatars out on a lot of things, and I think I can see why he did it. We could never match up to what he and you were. Sometimes, you must accept what you cannot do before you realize what you can do. Remember, greatness is born upon someone. It is thrust upon them, and it tests them throughout their journey. Your test is just beginning, child. I will tell you now that you do not have the power to sustain the Jubi here, and neither do your past lives. You must allow Naruto to finish off the beast and accept his destiny as the child of prophecy. The Jubi was the threat of our time, so the savior of our time must do the job. Your time's threat is not yet here. I will give you the knowledge needed to channel the inner energies within yourself and others since you will need it in the future." He then placed a thumb on Aang's forehead and the other on his heart before knowledge of a past art rushed into his mind. When Hagoromo pulled his hands back, he nodded once before he fluxed his remaining power at full strength. "What are you doing?" asked a surprised Aang. "Calling forth the Jubi. It is time for Naruto to fulfill his destiny. Remember, Avatar, energy bending is not to be taken lightly. It may succeed on your half, but you may also corrupt yourself in the process. Use it with the greatest of cautions." Aang nodded before he felt a series of tremors and crashes and widened his eyes in fear at the sight of the Jubi. It was a massive, grayish-purple being with a blob-like main body that looked to have a large and spiky conch shell on it. Its 10 tails raged furiously and tore up the landscape, while its many rows of razor-sharp teeth and its single blood red eye brought terror to the Avatar's body and soul. "Spirits above," he whispered in pure fear. Hagoromo said nothing and his body faded into flecks of light before a rip in the space of the spirit world opened up. His voice echoed, "Go, young Avatar. You are no longer needed here and the Jubi will follow you. I'll use the last of my power to place it away from your comrades, but it won't just wait idly by." Aang nodded quickly and didn't waste a second in entering the portal followed not soon after by the raging calamity. "Good luck, child. And your time of ascension draws near, my descendant." Human plane, after Aang left. As soon as the young monk left to the spirit world, the combined armies all heard the sound of multiple machines above them. As one they all turned to see 5 hot air balloons with the Fire Nation insignia along with 5 metal blimps that looked to be a tad bit longer than Fire Navy ships. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the sight while absently hearing the inventor remorsefully tell of his own invention being used in such a manner. Turning to Mai, she nodded and stepped closer to him while Naruto called out, "Back to the ships. We'll handle this." "General," called out a voice, making Naruto turn to see a trio of Lotus members rushing over looking out of breath. The capital is completely empty. Of course it is, commented Azulen in a self-reprimanding tone. How could I not see it coming? Father must have emptied the city of its citizens and left while the army stayed to give the illusion of him being here. Leave it to my brother to do something like that, stated Iroh, as he and Zhongjong approached from the direction of the prisons. He was wearing a tattered brown cloak over his torso, so that he wasn't bare for others to see. Those machines are going to be a serious problem if they reach the docks and harbor before we do. Naruto turned to the remaining members of the gang and ordered, lead the others back to the ships. Load as many of them as you can and get the hell out of here. Mai and I will handle the ships while the eclipse is still in effect. They nodded and quickly took charge of the situation while Naruto made a two-finger salute to the sky. Before the eyes of his army, Wan Shirtong landed before him wearing a vest similar to Sunegakure's Jonin only for his size. It's time I take it? Yes. Mai, get on. We're taking the fight to them. She nodded and quickly got on Wan's back before the owl took to the air with a powerful flap of his wings. As for Naruto, his Rinnegan let off a silvery glow as he kicked off of the ground, leaving a small crater from his strength. Using the higher level of control he had gained from his dojutsu, he stood calmly in the air with his Kazipo, while Wan calmly kept his altitude next to the blonde. How are we gonna do this, Naruto? Asked Mai as she sat still on Wan's back and gathered natural energy. Simple, I gather them up, he began as he held his palms together before a black sphere formed between them, and you take them out. Remember Mai, one clean motion, no hesitation. She nodded as she finished gathering the energy needed to enter Sage mode, revealing the toad-like eyes as she opened them. Got it, she murmured as she created two clones. With her left hand, she used her middle and pointer fingers to gather lightning chakra. Raising them slightly over her head, she brought them down in a slight curve, leaving a stable trail of lightning that was shaped into a makeshift bow. Her right palm was held up and gathered a Rasengan into it that was supplied with lightning chakra before the two clones used their nature chakra to shape it into an arrow with a corkscrew tip that had sparking and swirling chakra raging within. Readying the arrow and drawing the string back, she waited for her shot as the clones dispelled to give her their leftover energy. As for Naruto, he shot the black sphere like a bullet towards the blimps and air balloons before he brought them together once more with a resounding clap and flux of chakra. Chibaku Tensei, planetary devastation. He roared as the sphere quickly expanded in size and began to draw the flying war machines within its force. The pull of the black sphere grew stronger as it grew in mass with the many ships, and Naruto gave his student and lover a nod. With a nod of her own, she released the arrow, and it pulled the chakra of the lightning bow with it as it streaked across the sky like a comet. Senpo Raitun, Rasen Yajirushi, Sage Art Lightning Style, Spiral Arrow. She cried, her yell echoing across the sky as the arrow shot directly into the center of the black sphere. The result was a flash of light that expanded into a sphere equally as large as the one Naruto's Rasen Shuriken, Spiral Shuriken, made when it struck. However, instead of thousands of small wind blades, the Rasen Yajirushi had thousands of sparks dancing around wildly within its range, shocking and scorching everything unlucky enough to get caught in its power. With a smirk, Naruto commented, I have nothing left to teach you, Mai. You are now a full realized Gamma Sennin. She smiled at the sight of her own version of the Rasengan and replied, I'm honored to accept this role, Naruto. When the sphere of light and electricity finally died down, all that was left was charred and scorched metal blimps that quickly lost the ability to stay airborne and fell to the earth below with resounding crashes. Before they could descend, Naruto caught something with his dojutsu and jumped in front of Mai while blocking an explosive shot of fire with a Shinra Tensei. When the smoke cleared, he glared down at the bald man with the third eye tattoo who looked to him stone-faced. Next to the man was Ozai with a scowl on his face, and another man with a calm look on his. You've been busy, Uzumaki. He yelled up to the blonde. I honestly can't believe that my forces were so overwhelmed by yours. Shows how little you know about what makes a good soldier, called back the Jinchuriki as he and Wan descended down to ground level. Mai jumped off of Wan's back and they all flew off to assist the others at the harbor. It takes more than numbers and power to win a war. It takes the guts to stand up to your opponent and the will to fight for what you truly believe in. Together, that is the will of fire. Scoffing, Ozai stood next to his 2 men and smirked. Yes, well, the eclipse has been over for some time now. Let's see how your precious will of fire compares to my fire. Shedding his upper robes and tossing them aside into flames, he prepared to attack the Uzumaki, before a large tremor was felt followed by a roar so foreboding and terrible that it made everyone freeze in fear. That would be the Jubi, stated Kurama with a growl. Naruto, you know what to do. Right, replied the blonde mentally as he grabbed Mai and disappeared in a swirl of wind. When they arrived to the Jubi's location, Mai's eyes widened in terror at the sight while Naruto glared down at the beast. His eyes caught sight of Aang quickly reaching their location, and when the monk landed he asked, "What happened in there?" "I arrived to a copy of the aftermath of your war, met the sage you told us about, met the other 8 Bijou, was given some much-needed knowledge, and was left at the sage's urging," quickly answered Aang. Naruto nodded and kept his gaze on the beast before he caught sight of Ozai flying, towards them with a jet of fire coming from his feet. He had a mad look on his face that seemed to make the Jubi perk up. Naruto's eyes widened in panic and he made to move. But he was too late to stop one of the Jubi's tails striking Ozai and absorbing him into its body. The 3 looked horrified at the sight, while the Jubi roared once more and turned its gaze on Naruto. The single red eye with ripples and tomo swirling within it stared down the dual dojutsu eyes of the last Uzumaki. Setting his face into a resolute determination, Naruto began to walk forward towards the beast. "Aang, take Mai and get out of here." "Naruto, I told you dash." Started Mai, but she was stopped by a fierce look from the man she loved. "Mai," he whispered, though that very whisper carried volumes of authority and worry. "Go." Shedding some tears she desperately tried to hold back, she reluctantly nodded, and leapt away from the battle with Aang. Before she did though, she whispered back to him, "I love you." He gave a faint smile at that and nodded before he left in a blur of pure speed. When he stopped moving, he stood atop the royal palace and stared across the destroyed capital city, while the Jubi growled bestially at him. With his eyes narrowed, Naruto sealed away his sand gourd and tossed away his cloak into the wind before he got into a ready stance. "Let's finish this," he murmured. "Play Black Blade by 2 steps from hell." The Jubi roared and charged the Uzumaki, who kicked off of the palace roof, and was engulfed in a golden aura, before a golden chakra version of the Kyuubi appeared and slammed into the calamity. Using his momentum, Naruto had the fox grab the Jubi's head and flip over it without letting go until it landed on the other side of the beast. As soon as its back paws touched the ground, the fox threw its arms forward, dragging the Jubi with it, and released the beast, sending it crashing into the mountainside that surrounded the capital city. Naruto then thrust his arms forward with a roar of primal fury, gathering the perfect ratio needed for the next technique. At the same time, he and Kurama yelled out, "Bijou Dama, tailed beast bomb." From the maw of the ethereal fox, a blast of highly condensed black and white chakras erupted and crashed into the Jubi, sending it through the mountainside and onto the side of the nearby volcano. The Jubi quickly got back up and roared at the 2 of them before its own Bijou Dama quickly formed and fired. Naruto was quick to act as he brought the ethereal fox down to his Kyuubi chakra shroud and pulled out a tri-pronged kunai. Holding it in front of him, he poured his power into it, and had the seal engulf the blast in a space/time portal. The seal began to shine a furious red before the blonde threw it straight into the air with all of his strength. As it flew, the seal finally cracked under the growing pressure and broke, releasing the blast of the Bijou Dama and lighting up the sky with its blast. "Dispel your clone now," ordered Kurama, and Naruto did just that, resulting in a cross-shaped pupil appearing in both of his dojutsu eyes. "You can physically strike it on your own now, but I don't know how much it will affect the Jubi. Keep your shroud on and keep having clones gather nature chakra." "Got it," replied Naruto as he activated his Kaze no Yoroi, wind armor, and blurred away so fast that he left after images with every step he took. He decided to try and confuse the beast and mixed in his gazebo with his steps, leaving hundreds of after images surrounding and flickering around the jubi. The beast growled and roared angrily as it swiped its tails all around its body, striking many of the after images and getting a few close calls with the original. One finally got close enough, but Naruto grabbed it with both hands and stopped it above his head. Re-entering his full Bija mode, Naruto gripped the tail with one claw, and had a Rasengan the size of a house form in his other claw. Yanking the beast towards him and thrusting the chakra sphere at the same time, the torrent of power struck the calamity in the face, and sent it back just as Naruto released its tail. However, as it flew back, the other tails whipped at Naruto from all directions, leaving him with no chance to dodge. Two struck his right side, another struck his left cheek, one in his gut, two on his chin, and the final three all hit him in the chest. The forces combined from the blows knocked Naruto back into the royal palace, and out of his Kyuubi mode. Within the rubble and wreckage, he stood up painfully with blood dripping down from every spot struck by a tail. The force was so great that it struck through the armor and still broke the skin hard enough to both bleed and damage the internal structure. "Damn it, that hurts," Naruto growled out through gritted teeth. He looked up and saw the jubi slowly coming back toward him, so he rose his arm up and summoned forth a Rasen Shuriken pumped full of nature chakra before he hurled it at the beast. The chakra shuriken tore through the air and slammed into the jubi, but it shrugged it off as it released a pulse of pure chakra far too similar to the Shinra Tensei for Naruto's liking. Growling, Naruto used his Azura Path's power to have his right arm turn into a chakra cannon before he enshrouded himself with the golden chakra of the Kyuubi once more. Leaping high into the air, he fired shot after shot of chakra against the jubi, but it just seemed to absorb each strike with a look of annoyance. Faster than lightning, it retaliated with a swing of its tail that slammed into Naruto and sent him hurtling into the side of the volcano. The force of the impact caused the volcano to tremor and the internal lava flow within to rage violently. On his hands and knees in pure pain, Naruto coughed up a large glob of blood onto the ground beneath him, and he weakly stared up at the jubi. He shook away the daze he still felt from the hit and slowly rose up to his feet before he was left shocked by the voice that spoke. "Finally in your rightful place, Uzumaki?" He looked to the beast in shock and gasped out, "Ozai?" A dark and insane laugh echoed across the lands as the jubi reared its head back in what Naruto assumed was laughter. Its single eye looked to him again as the many rows of teeth stretched into a grin. "Surprised, Uzumaki? I always said that I was destined to become the ruler of the world. Now, I will achieve that very statement with the power of the very beast that you fear. I will burn this world to ashes and have it reborn so that its very inhabitants serve me as their god." Glaring hatefully, Naruto rose to his full height and growled to himself, "How could I forget that the jubi needed a host with any kind of intellect to stay here? Now this bastard is in control of it, but for how long is the question? It doesn't matter how long. All that matters is taking that bastard down," roared Kurama as Naruto mentally dispelled his clones and re-entered his sage mode. "There might be a way to end this. But the chances are incredibly small and the price is your life. Whatever it is, I'll do it. All right. First we need to hold Ozai in a single place." Naruto mentally nodded and formed another Chibaku Tensei in his hands before he fired it at Ozai. The beast that was once a man saw the sphere coming, and he made to swipe at it with one of his tails, but it suddenly shot up and over his head before it expanded and began to draw everything in. "What is this?" roared the beast as he used his claws and tails to hold himself in place. He barely moved a few feet every few seconds, but he was unable to defend himself without succumbing to the pull quicker. "Now, summon forth all of your power, every single energy you know of that you can control. Gather it all within your core." Gritting his teeth, Naruto held his palms together and called upon every energy source he knew of. The energy each living being had known as chakra. The cursed energy that was the Sharingan. The revered energy that was the Rinnegan. The pure energy that was nature chakra. And the potent power that was Biju chakra. Swirling inside him and his very core were all 5 of these energies, forming together into a silvery aura that covered his body in a misty shroud. "Now, converge it all on your Sharingan," ordered Kurama. The Uzumaki complied, and all of the energy, including the misty shroud, swirled around him and flew into his right eye that began to change form. His left eye returned to its natural blue color with no additional features, while his right eye had become a very intense-looking form. Surrounding it was the orange pigmentation of the Gamma Sennin. The eye itself was a silvery purple like the Rinnegan with 3 ripples, each with 3 tomo of the Sharingan. In the center of the eye was the horizontal round bar of the toads, while the vertical slit of the bijou formed across it in a cross pattern. The crossed pupil, the ripples, and the tomo all had a golden glow to them that was similar to that of the Kyuubi shroud. 5. You know what you must do next, Naruto. Mentally nodding, Naruto fluxed his power to full strength in his eye, causing the ripples to thicken, the tomo to spin in a clockwise manner, and the cross pupil to shine brighter, while a distortion filled the vision of his eye. The forces created by his eye made it incredibly difficult to take aim, and he knew he had only one shot. What made it worse was how Ozai was slowly breaking free of the gravitational pull of the Chibaku Tensei. "I can't miss. This has to hit," he mentally cried as he forced his eye to take aim on Ozai. The man-turned beast was about to fully break free before a sparking bolt struck his side and caused him to stumble slightly. Turning slightly, he snarled bestially at the sight of Mai standing atop Wanshirtong with her hands in a pose that showed she had just fired her Rasen Yajirushi. Growling in pure rage, he roared, "Child, when I finish with your precious master, you will be the next to die." "Not gonna happen," declared Naruto as his eye finally took full aim at Ozai. "It's time that you disappeared from this world, forever." Saisha no Cake, Zetai Kamui, Final Gambit, Absolute Authority of the Gods. Directly within Ozai, a powerful temporal swirl of pure energy was formed and began to absorb the beast into it. Sparks of black electricity also formed from the spatial rips in reality that the temporal swirl caused, and they rendered Ozai weaker as he desperately struggled to get free. No. No. This was not supposed to happen. I was supposed to rebirth this world as its god. No. With that last echoing roar, Ozai was finally pulled into the swirl before it collapsed in on itself and exploded in a burst of white fire and black lightning, making the winds rage and push away anything close. Naruto was barely within range and was forced to tumble away before he landed on his back in a broken and exhausted heap. When Mai, who was barely out of range, saw the man she loved stay still, her heart clenched and she quickly began to rush over to his side. She didn't care that Ozai was gone, that the Jubi was gone, or that they had won. All she cared about at that moment was Naruto. Chapter 20, Epilogue, Looking Ahead. His vision was blurred, but not enough to cause much issue. The biggest problem he had was his complete inability to move his body from the shoulders down. He coughed a couple of times as blood dribbled from his lips. Dear Kami-sama and spirits above, he had never been so utterly tossed around. The sound of rushing footsteps getting closer to his prone position made him weakly turn his head to see Mai approaching him at full speed. When she reached him, she slid on the ground and stopped right next to him on her knees with tears freely falling. "Naruto," she gasped out as the adrenaline was starting to leave her, and she noticed his beaten and bleeding form. Very gently, she moved his head to her lap as he gave her a weak smile. Looking up so that she can see his eyes, he replied, "Mai. I guess, we won, Annie." She couldn't find it in her to stop a smile from forming at his weak optimism. Her amber eyes stared into his single blue left eye and milky black right one. It was apparent that his final attack rendered his transplanted eye utterly blind in its deactivated state, which was the charcoal black eyes of the Uchiha. "Is everyone all right?" he asked, pausing to swallow some blood that came up. "No one was lost, right?" She nodded once as she hugged him closer to her. "Yes. Everyone's safe." "Everyone's all right," she answered while pausing slightly in sadness. She knew he was losing strength quickly and no one would be able to reach them in time to even begin trying to heal him. "Good," he murmured almost breathlessly. "I'm glad that you're all right. I don't know what I'd do if anything happened to you." He looked up to see her crying over him with her eyes clenched shut and her hands holding him in a death grip. "It's almost time, my." She let out a sob at that and hugged him tighter. "No. Please Naruto, you can't die. I can't lose you. I can't lose the man I love." "I know," he replied in a regretful tone. "I wish there was another way, but we did everything we could. Now, we just have to let things pass." Her shoulders were shaking as she kept whispering pleas for him to not die. Getting her attention by shifting his head, he looked her dead in the eye as she opened hers to gaze at him. "I need you to do something for me, my." "Anything," she answered immediately. Giving her the best smile he could muster, he declared, "I want you to live, my. Live on for the future, for Kikyo, for what we fought for. Don't give up because I won't be there. Don't see my death as an excuse to keep yourself from seeing the future." He used the last of his strength to lean his face up and press his lips against hers in one final kiss, one that she reciprocated with everything she could. When he pulled back, his one good eye was losing its light as he gave one final whisper of, "I love you, Naruto." She gasped as the last traces of life left his blue eye and his body went still with the loving smile still on his face. Fresh tears came and streamed down her cheeks freely before she released a long and loud wail of despair. Naruto Uzumaki. The one who she found in that cave on Ember Island. The one who read her so much easier than anyone else. The one who she was able to be herself around. The one who taught her of her ancestry and of the ways of the shinobi. The one who she fell in love with. The one she gave her heart to in 2 nights of love and passion. The one who gave her a future life to love and care for. The one who gave his life for the sake of the world and for her. Naruto Uzumaki was dead, and yet he was still able to give her a smile of support and love. "Stop music." "Such a pity," an elderly voice muttered, making her eyes widen and her body instinctively turned to face the speaker with a fresh kunai ready. She stopped however when she saw that time had stopped and the world had turned into a grayscale with only herself, Naruto, and the newcomer in natural color. She narrowed her eyes at the gray-skinned man and growled out, "Who the hell are you?" To her growing ire, he gave her a knowing smirk as he floated over so that he was on the other side of the recently passed Uzumaki. "I am Hagoromo Otsutsuki, the Rikudo Sannin and ancestor of the man who lies dead in your lap." She didn't lessen her narrowed eyes by even a fraction as she retorted, "What do you want?" "To help," he answered simply, making her gently lay her love's head down on the ground and pull out a second kunai. Sighing, he waved his hand and caused her weapons to disappear as Naruto was suddenly raised in a floating sphere of silvery orange energy. "Now, we don't need you to act rashly, child. As I said, I am merely here to help." "How?" she asked with a fierce look. Instead of answering, he turned his Rinnegan eyes towards the floating Uzumaki and placed his hands on the sphere. The light began to swirl within itself and around the floating body, making my make to reach out to him. "I would refrain from touching the energy, unless you wish to die before I can give you what you want." She quickly retracted her hand as if it was just burned before she asked, "And just what exactly makes you know what I want?" "It's obviously clear what you wish for. You wish for my descendant to stay with you, and he shall." "How?" she asked angrily before her tone became remorseful. "He's dead and you shouldn't even be here." He chuckled slightly and turned his gaze to her. "Just trust me. I promise that he will be with you. I just need to prepare him for his new position." "Position?" she queried with a raised brow. "Yes. Now, watch closely. Play some kind of music for rebirth." Still unsure and doubtful, she turned her amber eyes to the sphere and saw the silver give way to black as the orange became brighter. It suddenly shrank in on itself, with Naruto shrinking as well, until it was no bigger than a Rasengan before a brilliant flash of light forced her to shield her eyes. It felt like an eternity before she felt it safe enough to look at the sage's work, and to say the results shocked her was a very large understatement. Before her stood the very man she had just seen die in her arms, though he looked different. His new look was like his ascended Kyuubi cloak, but the chakra formed into a coat, but with a dark-colored bodysuit underneath. The bodysuit covered his torso, reached down his arms to the knuckles, and down his legs, stopping just above his sandals, which were colored the same as his coat along with his fingers. There was also a bright circle where his old seal was placed as well as Magatama around his collar, and the coat had Hagoromo's symbol, composing of the Rinnegan above 9 Magatama, on its back. Lastly, a dog-sized fox of the same flickering orange flames was standing next to him with his crimson eyes gleaming with mischief. 1. Stop music. She couldn't speak for a long time as she just gaped at the man before her who looked to her warmly, though his eyes looked like his fused Kyuubi and Gamma ones. She didn't care about that though as her mind finally rebooted, and she rushed into his arms and cried joyfully into his chest. "I thought I lost you," she whispered. "You nearly did," he replied as they both turned to a smirking Hagoromo. "I can't thank you enough for this, Lord Sage." Hagoromo chuckled and shook his head before he stated, "I don't need your thanks. I just did what I believed was right and needed. This woman, as well as this world, still needs your guidance and care. As such, I felt it best to promote you to a new position in the world. You are no longer the child of prophecy, that job is finally finished. Now, you are Naruto Uzumaki, the spirit of peace. Should there ever be a person desperately needing your counsel and assistance, you will be there to answer that call." Naruto nodded once before he removed himself from Mai's embrace and held out his hand to the sage. "I figured this was my only chance to actually do this with you, Lord Sage. It is truly an honor." Taking the new spirit's hand and shaking it firmly, Hagoromo replied, "The honor is mine, for I have never met someone who gave and sacrificed so much for the sake of peace." His form started to fade and a final whisper of "I leave the rest to you" was heard before the Rikudo Sannin left the world, forever. Naruto then turned to Mai and gave her his famous foxy grin alongside the fox, whom I believed was Kurama reborn, before he declared, "I guess we have more work to do, Mai." She smiled and nodded before she stood beside him and relished in the feeling of his arm around her waist. "Yeah. It will be beyond troublesome, but..." She looked up to him and her smile grew as she finished, "I'll gladly do it alongside you." 9 months later, Fire Nation. Mai Uzumaki, having taken the name of the man she loved, was lying on a single bed with nurses and doctors around her as she took deep breaths to prepare herself. She had been at this for a while, and she was just one more push from seeing her daughter's birth. "All right, Lady Uzumaki, push," called out the head doctor before Mai let out a cry of effort and pain. Seeing his chance, the doctor grabbed the child and pulled it out of her womb, allowing the newly born girl to cry loudly in the room. Carefully cutting the umbilical cord, he handed Mai the child and stated, "It's a girl. Play some kind of joyful music." Taking her child, Mai looked to her with nothing but love and care as she whispered, "Kikyo. Welcome home." The baby's cries were softened at the sound of her mother's voice, and she turned to her with her eyes still closed. The doctors and nurses were quick to check the health of the new babe and informed Mai of Kikyo being perfectly healthy before they left, allowing Fire Lord Zuko, Admiral Azula, Queen Ty Lee, and Lady Ursa to come in. Zuko was crowned Fire Lord after the war was declared finally over. Azula, having grown emotionally from her dealings with Naruto, was not upset in the slightest about her brother taking the crown. However, she did smirk when Ty Lee boldly captured the newly crowned ruler in a fierce kiss in front of everyone, causing cheers to cry out from the potential queen of the Fire Nation. She was actually one of the 2 maids of honor at the wedding 7 months after Zuko's crowning. Ursa, having been offered the chance to return and spend the rest of her life with her children, was overjoyed at the sight and couldn't wait for future grandchildren, much to Zuko and Ty Lee's embarrassment. "She's beautiful," Ty Lee whispered, seeing Kikyo softly fall asleep in her mother's arms. "What did you name her?" "Kikyo," answered Mai. "Kikyo Nara Uzumaki." She's going to become something incredible in the future, Azula commented with a smirk and a hand on her hip. I'm sure he'd be proud. Mai nodded with a soft smile at the mention of the father. Ursa was silent, but Mai easily saw the happiness in the woman's eyes and was grateful for her appearance. She felt a shift in the wind and her eyes turned to the side of the bed that wasn't occupied by a gushing Ty Lee. Invisible to all but her and their daughter, Naruto looked down to the baby girl and smiled lovingly with tears of joy coming from his eyes. Moving closer, he embraced his love and their child for the first time as a family. Stop music. 15 years later, Whirl Island of the Fire Nation. On a small island some miles away from Crescent Island, a tombstone with a spiral carved into it rested in the ground with a group of 9 people standing before it to pay their respects. The day of the year was the Day of Peace, the day that Naruto Uzumaki defeated the Jubi and banished it from the very world they all lived in forever and brought the beginning of peace to the world. The tombstone was made in respect to both his sacrifice and the village that once resided the soil they stood on. Surrounding the remainder of the island were the ruins of the lost Uzushi-Ogakure, village of the swirling tides, the ancestral home of Naruto's clan. Standing there were Zuko, a pregnant Ty Lee, Azula, Aang, a pregnant Katara, Sokka, Toph, Mai, and a teenage girl. She had shoulder-length dark red hair, 2 whisker marks on each of her cheeks, and heterochromatic eyes. The left eye was a deep blue, like the ocean waters, and her right was a fierce amber, like that of the owls her father once summoned. She wore a black dress with a red trim, black sandals like her mother once wore, and a silver medallion. This girl was Kikyo Nara Uzumaki, the now teenage daughter of Naruto and Mai, and she was here with her mother and her friends to pay respects to her father. She had heard stories of the man from her mother and the others, but she was depressed when told that he died before she was born. It hurt that she was unable to speak to him and see him, but she was immensely proud to have a father who defeated something that nearly destroyed the world. She blinked when everything became grayscale save for her mother and herself. She looked to Mai, who merely had a knowing smile and asked, "Mom, what's going on?" Mai kept her smile as she nodded her head back to the tombstone and answered, "Kikyo, meet your father." Her eyes widening, Kikyo's head shot back to the stone, and she gasped silently in shock at the flickering form of the spirit of peace. Her eyes slowly went upwards until her mismatching eyes met his cross-pupil ones. "Father?" she asked in a whispered tone as tears formed in the corners of her eyes. When the smile he was giving her grew, and he opened his arms, she immediately shot into his arms and clutched him like a lifeline as her body shook with happy sobs and joyful tears. Naruto softly stroked her back and held her close as Mai came up to them. After a brief kiss with Mai, he crouched down to Kikyo's height and smiled as he gently wiped away her tears. "You don't know how badly I've wished to speak to you like this, Kikyo. Look at you. You're already almost grown up and ready to see the world." She was overjoyed to hear her father's praise and see his smiling face. It was what she had dreamed about for years after learning of his life and sacrifice. But she couldn't say anything since there was no need to. The family was perfectly content with the peaceful silence and the comforting presence of each other as father and daughter met for the first time since her birth. 55 years later, Republic City. A woman was seated in a meditative position atop the statue of the late Avatar Aang that stood proudly before the thriving Republic City. Her eyes were closed and her breathing was calm as she performed her daily meditation and calming of the soul. Taking one last calming breath, she opened her eyes and stared down at the city, her blue and amber orbs taking in everything that could be seen. She stood up to full height, allowing the ocean winds to make her hair seemingly float in their breeze. Kikyo Nara Uzumaki had grown into a very beautiful woman over the years. While 70 years in age, she looked no older than 40, a blessing from her Uzumaki genes. She wore red Zora sandals with black socks, silver hakama pants with black owl feathers on the left leg, a black top that left her abdomen bare under a long-sleeved mesh shirt, a black coat with a red trim and Uzumaki swirl on the back, her Uzumaki medallion, and her Yuzu Hayate wrapped around her left arm. Her right arm was in a sling and rested underneath her coat with the hands sticking out, and the right sleeve left to flutter in the breeze. 2 and 3. She smirked as her eyes turned to an approaching ship that was nearing the docks. There was a very powerful energy signature coming from it which caused her to chuckle. Well, it looks like our newest avatar has come to Republic City. About damn time, she stated in a playful voice. I wonder what kind of mischief she'll find herself in on her first day. She chuckled again at the thought of the newest avatar causing headaches for Lin Beifeng. If one asked her, she'd say that the chief of police seriously needed to take a break from everything. She was way too serious all the time. Sighing, her eyes turned content as she looked up to the sky. Father, I promise you that this piece you helped give us will not die. And Uzumaki never breaks a promise, and I sure as hell will not be the first to do so. Grinning much like her father once did, she leapt off her perch and descended to the ground beneath her, unaware of a certain spirit of peace appearing where she once stood with a prideful look on his face. I know you won't, my precious child. He whispered to the wind before he and the fox beside him faded into nothingness. He could leave things to Kikyo for a while. She was his daughter after all. The end. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfictions. Looking forward to having you on board again.